Call to order the October meeting of the Morrisville Planning and Zoning Board and ask Harleen to give us an invocation.
Thank you. Father in heaven, we do thank you for this day, and we thank you that we do live in this country. We pray that you will be with the people that have suffered so much in these recent storms, that you'll give them hope, you'll give them cope. We pray that you'll be with our first responders, especially our armed forces overseas. And we pray that you'll be with us tonight in helping us to do the best we can for our little community of Morrisville. Amen.
Thank you, Harleen. Any changes to the agenda from your side, Courtney?
I don't have any changes. I just was to say for the work session, it's up to the board if they want to hold that this evening, since it's a non-normal scheduled meeting, if you will, and defer it to the November meeting, or you can go ahead and have the conversation tonight. I'll leave it up to the board to decide, but I just wanted to kind of put that out as an option. It can be deferred if necessary.
And that was on the work session?
Yes, that's item 11A, since I know several of you kind of changed things around to get here this evening.
So when we get roughly to that point in the agenda, I think we'll have that discussion about whether to continue or not. Any changes to the agenda from the board side? Two sets of minutes. The August 23rd work session. Any changes or comments on that set of minutes?
No.
Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
I'll move that we approve the minutes of August 23rd.
I have a second. Motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
The minutes are approved. Then we have the September 6th regular meeting. Any changes or additions to that? None. I'll entertain a motion. Motion to approve from Tim. Do I have a second? Second from Bob. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
So approved. Thank you. So racing ahead to item number 9, which is an item with public comment, but it's also a quasi-judicial process. Might want to guide us on that. Courtney, do you want to say a few words before we start, and Marty will swear everybody in?
Certainly. So just as a quick reminder, you did receive an FAQ in advance of the meeting. It was also included in your packet. So any decision associated with a quasi-judicial, it has to be based on the findings. And it's up to the applicant to demonstrate that they've met the findings. If the findings have been met, the board can make a recommendation of approval. If a finding you feel is not quite met, you can request additional information from the applicant, and the applicant can choose to provide it. If the applicant decides not to provide the information and you feel a finding has not been met, then you would have to take an actual recommendation on each one of the findings. If you find across the board they're all met, you can bundle all the findings together in one recommendation and recommend approval to the board. All your decision has to be based off information provided in this meeting. I would say that a good example is you sit at an intersection, say transportation is what I mean. You sit at an intersection every single day, so you're experienced, and based off your experience, you don't believe the information provided is accurate. You can make a statement based off your experience, but you can't make a wholesale statement of, I'm pretty sure this time of day the traffic's kind of bad. So it has to be based off of true facts. Based on your experience of sitting at a delayed light 5 cycles every day could be a true experience. Again, if you have opinions, those are not relevant. If you think something may be better that is not relevant, have they provided information for you to determine whether or not a finding has been met. And you cannot talk about this outside of the actual meeting when the public hearing is open. Public hearing's closed, you're welcome, and you've made a decision, you're welcome to talk about it. But all decisions and all information have to be made in this public forum while the public comment session is open.
Thank you, Courtney.
I have a question. So if we have questions that aren't that are sort of tangentially related to the information that's presented. We're allowed to ask questions of the presenters, correct?
You are allowed to ask questions of the presenters, and even anybody from the public that wants to provide input, you're allowed to ask questions of them too, because everything has to be factual. I think the biggest example I have is, libraries are bad, if I wanted to say something along those lines. They don't do anything great. Well, that's my opinion. I need facts that, kind of justify that. We've had past cases where a professional engineer came and spoke to something, but their specialty wasn't transportation. And so when they were called on whether or not their specialty was transportation, they said no. And at that point, they were, the attorney representing, it was a BOA case, but said, basically you cannot include that as part of your decision because it's not competent testimony. So you very often have to hear from an actual architect that designed it, or an architect would understand, certain building codes that were maybe being proposed. A PE that specializes in design. A landscape architect. A person off the street can't really say that a tree proposed is bad unless maybe they have a certain background in that and they can provide that. So you have to understand it's supposed to be expert testimony and it's not opinionated.
Any other questions or clarification on the process? And we'll move ahead. Marty, if you would swear in those people who want to speak on this topic. Anybody who wishes to speak, please come up.
Anyone, you can just stand where you are. Any staff or applicant, anybody speaking on, raise your right hand, please. Do you affirm to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth where evidence presented before the Planning and Zoning Board of the Town of Morrisville regarding an alternative equivalent compliance application for the Wake County Public Library to be located at 310 Town Hall Drive, AEC 18-09? Thank you.
So are you going to introduce the topic, Courtney or Michelle?
Michelle's going to be handling the topic. Thank you.
As was indicated, Wake County has submitted an application for approval of an alternative equivalent compliance request, or an AEC application, for the Morrisville Community Library. As a reminder, I think we've gone over some of this. An AEC application is a quasi-judicial request. We recently talked a little bit about the AEC process in regard to another item, but as a reminder, really the purpose of this process and type of application is to encourage creative and unique or alternate designs that allow development to occur in a manner that meets the intent of the UDO, yet through an alternate design that does not strictly adhere to the ordinance's design standards. And then the standards for approval of an AEC request are listed there on the overhead. Those are the 5 items that the petitioner will need to present arguments or findings for in regard to each of the deviations that they are seeking. I'm not going to read through each of those, but with the AEC, the idea is that the standards are somewhat more flexible than they would be with your traditional variants. I think everyone's probably familiar with the site of the library, but just very quickly, the area that we're talking about is outlined in red on the screen. The zoning is the Main Street District, and this is a portion of the block that makes up the area of the Town Center Demonstration Project, with Town Hall Drive being to the west, Jeremiah Street to the north, Foxglove to the east, and Carolina Street to the south. For context, I just thought I would include the concept plan from the Town Center Demonstration Project. You could see the library envisioned there at the southeast corner of that site, and then kind of the plans for the rest of the demonstration project, or at least conceptually, how the library project would eventually fit in to the development of that demonstration project. There are 7 deviations being requested as part of the library's application. Just in summary, they are for block length, FAR, on-street parking configuration, parking location, build to standards, fenestration, and light transmittance. And it looks like this is now working. As Director Tanner indicated, it is really up to the applicant to make their case and arguments as to how they believe the standards for each of these deviation requests have been met. However, I do want to very briefly just touch on each of them. So the first deviation is for block length along Foxglove, Town Hall Drive, and Carolina Street. And that request would allow the maximum block length of 350 feet to be exceeded. In general, the lengths of these blocks run from about 415 feet to 535 feet. And the block was really created in association with the town when the block for the demonstration project was created and the designs for Carolina Street were approved. The second deviation request is for FAR to allow an FAR or floor area ratio of 0.26 in lieu of the minimum FAR of 0.5 required. Given that this is the Main Street district, the idea is that kind of mass and bulk and density were to be encouraged in this district. That's very hard to get with a single-story building, so this requirement really almost forces someone to build up. With the library project, we are looking at a one-story building. However, that building is higher than most one-story buildings that you might normally see, with a height of 23 feet proposed. There is also some outdoor usable patio area being proposed that you may have seen on the site plan that provides, additional usable space. The third deviation is to allow parallel on-street parking along Carolina Street and Foxglove Drive in lieu of diagonal on-street parking. The UDO does specify that diagonal parking should be used in this area. Once again, part of that decision occurred in communication with the town when we were designing and determining that block for the demonstration project. And our town engineer, Kent Jackson, is here tonight in case you do have any questions for him about that. The next one is to allow the proposed parking to be located between the building and adjacent streets. In this district, all parking is really supposed to be hidden behind the buildings. If you go back to the concept plan for the demonstration project, you could see that it would be virtually impossible to build this first phase without having any parking between the building and the street because we do have streets on all 4 sides. But as the demonstration project gets built out, that condition should go away, so that we believe would be temporary in nature. Deviation number 5 has to do with minimum build 2 lines along Town Hall Drive and Carolina Street. So once again, this is a Main Street district, and trying to create kind of that character of a Main Street. There were, the idea was we wanted buildings constructed up to the road, once again, with parking behind them. So essentially, you need to build within 0 and 20 feet of that front yard. There is a gas main running along Town Hall Drive that really precludes that from happening along the Town Hall Drive portion of the property. And then the roundabout and unique curvature of that creates some other unique situations. Deviation number 6 is to allow 30% fenestration on the southwest building facade, and that's the building facade that would face Town Hall Drive, in lieu of the 45% that is required by the UDO. And that standard relates to the amount of transparent glass windows and doors that would be located along that frontage. They are meeting the requirement facing Carolina Street, actually exceeding it in that area at 50%. So we're just looking at the Town Hall Drive portion. Deviation number 7 has to do with light transmittance, and I'm very close on that one at 0.64 instead of 0.65. In addition, just to note, there is a requirement in the UDO. One of the standards for approval you may have seen is that a compensating public benefit be provided. And then there's kind of a list of compensating public benefits that the applicant can choose from. In regard to this specific request, granting the request would provide a public benefit as required by allowing the construction of the library project to move forward and by furthering the plans for and promoting the development of the town center. So that's just a brief overview. Once again, the applicant's going to get into more detail with the specific findings and presenting their case, and they do have building elevations and site plans to share with you as they go through some of that. This item is scheduled for briefing before the town council right now at their October 23rd meeting, and then they would also need to hold a public hearing following that. And right now that is scheduled, I can't remember the date off the top of my head, but that's second Tuesday in November for public hearing and potential action. So I guess I would entertain any questions that you might have, probably primarily related to process. Really want to hand it over to the library to present their case.
Remind me what FAR stands for.
I'm sorry, what stands for?
The floor ratio.
Floor area ratio.
Okay, thanks.
Else? Then I think we're ready to proceed. Thank you, Michelle.
And as a reminder, I don't think we've actually formally opened the public comment session, so that does need to occur.
So we will formally open the public comment session. Thank you. Ready when you are. If you could give us your name and address for the
Okay,
record.
thank you. Oh, I'm not public comment, so I'm with the library group.
That's fine. It actually should have been open before Michelle even spoke, because since they're required to take all testimony under the public comment portion.
Okay, so we're good to go?
Perfect to go. Yes.
Well, thank you and good evening. My name is John D. Harrell. I'm with Wake County Facilities Design Construction and the project manager for this project. I thought it'd be fair to kind of give you a brief synopsis of how this library even came to be. In 2007, there was a bond referendum that was approved for $45 million that really captured a library master plan. And that encompassed quite a bit of items, encompassed replacing one library, a regional library, some expansions and renovations in existing libraries, and 3 new community branch libraries. And the Morrisville Library is the third and final one to be captured in that bond. This library is about 8,900 square feet, is what you'll see as we go through the presentation, just to give you a scale of it. And it'll contain about 50,000 books, 16 computers, public computers, and several programs for children and adults as well. And that's pretty standard with Wake County libraries. At the moment, Wake County has a mix between regional and community libraries of 22 total, so this would be the 23rd one to be part of that package. It wouldn't be fair to say, but it's been really a good relationship working with the town of Morrisville Planning and their community and their group. as soon as this town demonstration core concept came into being, we were encouraged to be kind of the first piece of that. So it was exciting to really be the litmus, to start that process going. Even though the spaces are a little bit different, as you'll see as we go through the presentation, what's going to come in after the library is mixed use, as you saw in the overall master plan. But being able to sit at the table through the master plan process was exciting, so much so that we actually, Little Diversified did the master planning with the town. We actually hired them to do the library as well, since they were very familiar with the constraints, per se, of that site. Just to give you a little bit of update on schedule, the project did go out for bid, yes. We received bid openings on Thursday, I believe, yep. And we are ready to proceed. We did present the interlocal agreement with the town council last Tuesday, and that's going to go, I think it's going to be approved on the 23rd. We will then wrap it up and present to the Board of Commissioners, and that will be November 19th. What we'll be presenting then will be adoption of the ILA, or the interlocal agreement, as well as award of the construction contract to the GC, or the low bidder. Let's see, yeah. So, we're moving forward, and we're excited to be a part of this. Wake County Planning Department is reviewing the building now for permit, but Morrisville is reviewing the site plan approval, and it's all pending on these final 7 items, or these AECs, being approved. With me, as Courtney said, you have to have somebody that knows what they're talking about. So we have Renee Pfeiffer from CLH Design out of Cary. She's our civil and landscape designer. With us as well, we have from Little, we have Christine Coates and Julie McLaurin, and they're the architectural team out of the Little Diversified office in Durham. And I was able to snag Kent Jackson from the town of Morrisville Engineering to help us out as well with one of the items. And you may ask yourself, well, why do you have one of our town engineers here? And well, again, we were working really closely with the town on how this whole demonstration project came together and came to be. All right, let's see if I can drive this. All right, so let's go to, again, as Michelle indicated, what you'll see on screen is the town demonstration core and in that dashed line. And the future growth, the 10-year master plan, you'll see how it extends quite a bit further out. So very aggressive and very exciting future for town of Morrisville. The yellow dot represents where the library is proposed to be. And it really starts to serve as an entry to the town demonstration core. But let us go through the presentation, and several of the AEC items, or the alternative equivalent compliance items, will make note of that. This is I'd say, pre-development rendering. What you'll see in the red is the library as it's currently designed, with the landscaping and the temporary parking, well, permanent temporary parking, but we can talk about that later as the master plan grows. I tell you, I hope you can read each one, but there we've identified each AEC item, and if that's okay, I'll just start going through those. And if we could just, I think it would be more efficient of our time if we could hold questions to the end, and that way we go through each AEC item, because what you'll know is some of them actually have reference to each other. All right. So item number 1, we are requesting an alternative equivalent compliance on the required maximum block length per section 5.3.1C of the UDO. The block that the library is located on does not meet the 350-foot maximum length of the Main Street district. The proposed alternative design will achieve the intent of the standards from which a deviation is sought to the same or a higher degree than the subject standards. How are we going to do this? Well, part of the challenges was, as the road development, the roundabout, the Carolina Street extension, and Foxglove Drive really started to set those boundaries, set those constraints on where and how that block would be developed. The introduction of the roundabout actually impacted slightly how that block length and the relationship of the library to that block length. But we feel that the introduction of a roundabout will also slow down the vehicle traffic, and increase that volume and safety for the pedestrian traffic, which is the vision for this area, is how individuals walk to this space, how they start to filter in to the town demonstration. And this, in turn, supports the pursued Main Street District concept. Item B is proposed alternative design is consistent with comprehensive plan and advances the goals of this ordinance to the same or higher degree than the standards from which a deviation is sought. Again, the roundabout and the road alignments were driven by the master plan effort and how best to package this block for future development, as well as including the library in that lower corner. The design of the road improvements was create a sense of continuous block all around, and you'll know this in another AEC item as it comes up. The roadways are very similar as you circle Jeremiah Street, Town Hall Drive, Carolina Street, and Foxglove Drive. Item number C, not number 3, number C. The proposed alternative design will impose no greater impacts on the adjacent lands than would occur through compliance with the standards which deviation is sought. Again, we believe it will actually enhance the surrounding area. Again, that similarity between Carolina Street and Jeremiah Street now really unifies both streets since they have same design, similar block lengths. Make sure I don't have another image here. Okay, good. All right. D, the proposed alternative design will not negatively impact public health and safety. As I mentioned previously, the intent of the roundabout is to slow traffic down. Crosswalks are placed and the landscaping is placed, so there's quite a bit of visibility between the vehicle and the pedestrian. Again, now you have a complete sidewalk going entirely around the entire demonstration block, and we feel this improves the safety of pedestrians or if a jogger wants to go out, and it keeps vehicle or traffic slow down the Town Hall Drive, down the roundabout, and it separates the pedestrian and the vehicle or traffic because of that roundabout. Crosswalks were also positioned so that there was no blind spots as a pedestrian came up to a crosswalk. And again, we feel this supports the pedestrian-oriented setting being pursued on the Main Street District. E, the proposed alternative design will provide one or more of the following public benefits to an extent that exceeds the requirement of this ordinance and any other local federal laws that is sufficient to compensate for the requested deviation from standards. Again, we felt that the orientation of the roads and tying in the entire block with similar road structure, road design, really creates a more exciting spot, a better, more pedestrian-friendly area. And I think we believe that putting a library in that corner really gives you visibility as you enter that roundabout, and it welcomes individuals, whether it's driving by car into the parking lot or pedestrians from the other side of Jeremiah Street neighborhood per se. Now they can actually walk to the library without having to they can cross one road instead of having to cross multiple roads. And again, we feel this really provides that goal of the Main Street District emphasis, the pedestrian, the walkability. All right, so that was a mouthful. Let's go to number 2. This one is regarding the FAR, as you indicated, the floor area ratio. I'll just spell it out. We are requesting an alternative equivalent compliance on the required FAR, or floor area ratio, per section 3.5.3 of the UDO. The current FAR of a new library building is 0.26 and is below the required 0.5. Jumping into A, the proposed alternative design will achieve the intent of the standards from which a deviation is sought to the same or higher degree. So let's talk about Wake County standards. Early on in the design process, and when Wake County was standardizing libraries, there's 3 size libraries. Well, there used to be 3. Now there's really 2. There's community and the regional. Being a community-sized library, It was determined between 8,000 square feet to 9,000 square feet. You may ask yourself, well, why is it single story? The reason it's single story is the size of it really doesn't benefit for it to go to a two-story, and there's concerns about how difficult it is to manage a two-story facility with a building this size. And I'll get into that as I go into each item. For example, staffing and visibility, safety of children if they're in a lower area or an upper area behind stacks per se. But let me go into each item, and I think that will be evident as I walk through it. So there's a couple things that limited our FAR. On A, as I indicated, the demonstration block, the intent of that size of that block was really to encourage future development. So in that, we didn't want to extend the boundaries of the library too far because that would limit how the developer comes into this site. So we decided to tuck it in that southwest corner where you could get visibility from the roundabout, and it would be an introduction to the town demonstration core. Now, as Michelle indicated, there's also a gas easement to the south, so we were kind of pinched and squeezed on where we could go with this building. It's being a single story, we were able to fit it in that corner, and it met the Wake County standard guidelines for a library this size. Item B, the proposed alternative design is consistent with the comprehensive plan and advances the goals of the ordinance to the same or higher degree than the standards from which the deviation is sought. Again, 8,900 square feet is a Wake County standard community-based library. What we have provided, we've tried to increase the exterior opportunities to create that pedestrian-friendly area or pedestrian gathering areas, and those really are dictated by Main Street District goals. So really create opportunities out on the exterior to bring individuals in outside of the library. Even though our floor area ratio was tight, we feel that we've really expanded out to the side as well by putting these gathering areas. The proposed alternative design will impose no greater impacts on adjacent lands than would occur through compliance with the standards from which the deviation is sought. Let's talk about safety a little bit. It's difficult. I think Wake County has Cameron Village is a two-story, and the challenges there is that Wake County has to increase staff quite a bit because you have to be able to see every corner of the library. In all fairness, unfortunately, it's not a safe world always that we live in, and we have to be careful where there's children picking up books that library members can see it, and a two-story makes it very difficult. It increases operational costs, one. It makes it very difficult to manage, regardless if you have cameras or not. What you'll know is there's always line of sight to the restrooms, and there's line of sight to the children's program areas. And for a library this size, it's very difficult to put a two-story facility and still maintain a safety standard, regardless of having tons of cameras, because we do have security as well. But it's much more easier with the amount of staff that we have to manage a building as a single story for 8,900 square feet. So the size is driven by program to support the community it serves as well. Again, we spoke about public health and safety. The one story is a lot easier to manage and keep eyes on. The proposed alternative design will provide one or more of the following public benefits, and to an extent that exceeds the requirements of the ordinance and any other local, state, federal laws, and is sufficient to compensate for the requested deviation from standards. Again, we feel that the proposed alternative design will support the implementation of the town Main Street District. It's really we're excited. It's the first step to the Main Street District, and the exterior areas, I think, will really lend itself to bringing those individuals in. We're the introduction to the remainder of the site, and you'll see as we go through the other alternative equivalency compliance items how we feel that starts to really pepper through the rest of our presentation. All right. All right, item AEC number 3 is we are requesting an alternative equivalent compliance on the required diagonal on-street parking configuration per section 5.9.10.c.2 of the UDO. If I may, I'm going to ask Kent Jackson, town engineer, to speak briefly about this, and I'll supplement as I can.
So you're speaking of the block deviation? So in addition to what John has pointed out, I think it's also important to point out the distance along Jeremiah to the existing Foxglove Drive is in the neighborhood of 500 feet. So wanting to align with that also had some influences for determining the location of the Foxglove Drive projection. That's the primary additional reasoning that I can point to outside of what John has said already.
Kent, could you also speak about the diagonal parking, item number 3?
Yes. So with the diagonal parking, a number of related issues. So certainly the parallel parking allows for less surface area of total road surface area, which is important in a number of ways. The first way is it minimizes the amount of runoff that we would have to treat from a stormwater consideration as one environmental benefit of that approach. It allows for the sidewalks to be better aligned for the pedestrian connectivity around the block on Foxglove and on Carolina Street. And also, certainly it's an interest to maximize the developable footprint of the parcels that we have available for the demonstration project. So I think those are the primary reasons leading to the parallel parking choice versus diagonal.
As a design, if I may, in item A, we mentioned, the item A is proposed alternative design will achieve the intent of the standards from which the deviation is sought to the same or higher degree of the subject standards. Many parking options were studied and coordinated with the town center master plan. And what I took away from it is, I think, tying the whole block together, there's already a precedent on Jeremiah Street with the parallel parking. And as we indicated, we don't want it to be like the outsider. We've actually incorporated that design into the overall intent and of overall block design. So it really becomes a part of the town demonstration now, instead of being, okay, you're to the side, you're different. It's really incorporated that design throughout the entire block.
Question on the quick question on the parking situation. Just I know we're going to hold questions at the end, just so I don't lose this one. What is the difference in number of spaces between the parallel parking and the diagonal parking? I'm assuming we have fewer spaces with the parallel parking. Do you know the delta there?
I don't know the exact number, but you're correct. You could put more vehicles with diagonal parking, but then again, your road widths would have to get a lot larger. So when you think about, as Kent said, when you start looking at surface runoff area, it really starts to impact you, because now you have so much more pavement typically to accommodate the diagonal parking that your infrastructure to support the stormwater runoff really increases. Does that, I'm sorry, I don't have the actual numbers.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, I'm just going to go through the process, Courtney, to go through each item then. Item B, the proposed alternative design is consistent with the comprehensive plan and advances the goals of the ordinance to the same or higher degree than the standards from which a deviation is sought. We believe that the proposed alternative design uses similar street design as those adjacent to the town center. Maintaining the continuity in design unifies the entire block, as I mentioned before. Item C, the proposed alternative design will impose no greater impacts on adjacent lands than would occur through the compliance of the standards from which a deviation is sought. The intent was to duplicate the Jeremiah Street road section with parallel parking throughout the town demonstration core area, and we feel, again, this unifies the entire block and makes it common throughout. D, the proposed alternative design will not negatively impact the health and safety. Since it's already implemented along Jeremiah Street, and this is, I believe, considered a safe road, we felt that maintaining that continuity kind of respected that design. And lastly, E, the proposed alternative design will provide one or more of the following public benefits to an extent that exceeds the requirement of this ordinance and any other local, state, federal laws, and that is sufficient to compensate for the requested deviation from standards. Again, I'm sorry I repeat myself quite a bit, but the roundabout and road improvement side plans, it was moving forward with this UDO and making sure that everything was captured as a single design. We didn't want multiple designs, multiple different road sections. We felt that maintaining that was on Jeremiah Street made sense throughout. And again, it accommodated other things as future development and the parking capacity for the library as well. All right. So we've talked about FAR, block length, and as well as parallel and diagonal parking. Now we're going to start to get into a little bit the design of the project, some of the site items. We're going to speak about number 4 is we are requesting alternative equivalent compliance on the required parking arrangement with relationship to the building section 5.10.6B1 of the UDO. I'm going to have Renee Pfeiffer jump in on this as well. Just to kind of brief everyone a little bit, you saw the master plan earlier that Michelle put up that showed the parking in that center area. If you can, it's tough. We got to take a step back and think about the process. So first we're going to have the library in the corner, and we have to support the users of that library with some parking in the center. So this paved parking is currently located in an area in the future we're looking to activate. What do I mean by activate? If you recall that master plan, it surrounded a central area, and our intent is that that area in the center really becomes active with pedestrians, whether it be active zones, maybe a playground. I'm just speaking out now. We're just thinking far along, but the intent is to bring individuals to the center of that block and then radiate out. Yeah? All right.
Good evening. I'm Renee Pfeiffer with CLH Design. We are the landscape architects and civil engineers for the Morrisville Community Library. I'm going to go over items 4 and 5 for the alternative equivalent compliance items. So I'm just going to get right into it. Item number 4, we are requesting an alternative equivalent compliance on the required parking arrangement with relationship to the building per section 5.10.6.B1 of the UDO. The proposed alternative design will achieve the intent of the standard from which a deviation is sought to the same or higher degree than the subject standard. So the on-site parking arrangement will provide a higher degree of functionality for both the library as well as the remaining demonstration area that surrounds it. There are 49 on-site parking spaces proposed, and based on this lot configuration, the required parking and the vehicle parking is located to the rear of the library building to the maximum extent possible and practicable. We spoke earlier about the library being a small component, but once this demonstration area is fully built out, the parking will actually comply with code because it will be behind all other buildings. It's just a temporary condition at this point. Item B is the proposed alternative design is consistent with the comprehensive plan and advances the goals of the ordinance to the same or a higher degree of standard from which the deviation is sought. The proposed alternative design provides parking for the demonstration area, as I mentioned, future development. Due to the size of the library building, the lot configuration, again, it's impracticable to locate all of the parking behind the building, essentially because it's surrounded by 4 roads. And also, according to the 2007 Town Center Plan, the parking configuration still provides the idea of creating a main street lined with small businesses and anchored by a civic or cultural facility. And in addition, the parking will meet the current UDO's screening requirements for landscaping. Item C is the proposed alternative design will impose no greater impact on adjacent lands than would occur through compliance with the standard from which the deviation is sought. The proposed vehicle parking location will in turn help the demonstration area by providing additional vehicle parking to be shared between the demonstration area and the library. The location of the parking will be set off of Carolina Street as well as Town Hall Drive and Foxglove as much as possible. And again, the vehicular landscaping will be provided to properly screen the parking area. Item D, the proposed alternative design will not negatively impact public health and safety. We do not feel as if the proposed parking will negatively impact the health and safety of the public, but actually the vehicle parking is designated with ease of access for vehicles to come to and from this area, as well as providing adequate sidewalks to link the parking areas with the surrounding roads. In item E, the proposed alternative design will provide one or more of the following public benefits to the extent that exceeds the requirements of the ordinance and any other local, state, federal laws, and that is sufficient to compensate for the requested deviation from the standards. I believe that the alternative design will provide support for the implementation of the town's Main Street district on Carolina Street by providing this adequate parking for both the demonstration area and the library. The library will be positioned towards Carolina Street as much as feasible, and I will get into that in the next AEC item. Gathering areas will be provided to link the library to the streets along Carolina Street especially. And per the Main Street district, zoning district, the library is going to provide a civic use for the continued development of the town's Main Street district.
Can I say something?
Absolutely.
So because if I was sitting in your spot, I might say, well, why does your parking need to be that long? Or why don't you push it up a little bit, right? For a community branch library, it's interesting. The majority of individuals that drive there, it's usually during children's program hours. So you're looking at about 10 or 11 o'clock. And really for this size library, we need about 65 parking spots. How did we accomplish this? I think the center area, what you see in the middle of your screen, the area right there, I think it's 44?
49.
49. And then you say, well, where are the rest of your parking spots? You just told me 65, right? Well, the way we accomplished that, we discussed with the town of Morrisville that we're going to say, hey, the parallel parking can also be used. So that's how we try to limit the parking in the center of the site while using the parallel parking on the perimeter. But that's how we're getting to our magic number. So
That's correct.
Yep.
All right, AEC item number 5. We are requesting an alternative equivalent compliance on the required maximum build to line and the minimum build to zone street frontage occupied by a building per section 3.5.3 of the UDO. Item A, the proposed alternative design will achieve the intent of the standards from which a deviation is sought to the same or higher degree than the subject standard. So this building is located outside of the max build to line. The reason is because of the configuration of the Carolina Street roundabout, as well as the location of the PSNC gas easement. So you can see John's kind of highlighting that it's a 50-foot easement off of Town Hall Drive that kind of wraps around the roundabout a bit. So we're unable to build within that 20-foot setback. But what we have done is tried, again, to link some gathering areas so that there is good access from especially Carolina Street through the library site so that it's easily accessible for the public. Item B, the proposed alternative design is consistent with the comprehensive plan and advances the goals of this ordinance to the same or a higher degree than the standard from which the deviation is sought. The location of the roundabout, again, prevents the new library building from being located within the required build-to zones. The building is located as close to the build-to zones as possible, and additional amenities, such as the gathering area that I mentioned, have been provided to help energize this area of the town. Item C, the proposed alternative design will impose no greater impacts on adjacent lands than would occur through the compliance of the standards from which the deviation is sought. Because of the challenges this site poses with the roundabout location, the 50-foot PSNC gas easement, the building is not able to be built within the Build 2 zones. We have provided additional landscaping along the face of the building towards Town Hall Drive, as well as the gathering areas along Carolina Street, to help create kind of that link with everything on this corner of the site. Item D, the proposed alternative design will not negatively impact the public health and safety. I believe we have created a comfortable atmosphere for the public by providing gathering areas, lush landscaping around the building, and we don't believe it will negatively impact the health and safety of the users, but make it a destination that they would want to visit. Item E, the proposed alternative design will provide one or more of the following public benefits to an extent that exceeds the requirements of this ordinance and any other local, state, federal laws, and that is sufficient to compensate for the requested deviation from the standard. So the proposed library design will provide support for the implementation of the town's Main Street district by providing these gathering areas that connect to the library building to Carolina Street to serve as an inviting entry to the library and promote pedestrian activity. And as I said earlier, additional landscaping will be provided to make this experience within their downtown Main Street district welcoming to residents and visitors. I will quit talking and I will hand this over to Christine Coates that will go over the last two AEC items that have to do with the building. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, so now we're going to get into the actual architecture of the building. We spoke about the road development. We've spoken about the civil and landscaping approach, and Christine's going to share with us how the design is exciting as it is, right?
It is exciting. Hi there, I'm Christine Coates with Little Diversified Architecture. The first item that I'll be discussing is the AEC item 6. We are requesting an alternative equivalent compliance on the fenestration per section 5.9.10.C, .7.C of the UDO. I think it might be helpful to see the floor plan. Did you see the floor plan? To the north is our main entry point. On the plan east, you have Carolina Street, and Town Hall Drive is to the south, and you'll see the parking lot is to the west. What we're trying to do is keep as John discussed earlier, we're trying to keep an open and active area between our library and the other adjacent buildings. So that left us with the task of trying to locate the mechanical yard in a safe area away from pedestrian traffic as to not interfere with their safety entering and leaving the building, and also to keep the public plaza areas open and active without any type of vehicular traffic through them. So that left us with the mechanical room and the mechanical yard to the south of the building, and that also was accompanied by necessary public restrooms. The impact that has on our elevations, although we were able to maximize the glazing on all the programmed elements of the building, we weren't able to add glazing to the mechanical room, the mechanical yard, and the bathrooms. We were able to have a small amount of glazing at the emergency exit zone, but that is kind of how the elevations worked out. We're including a couple perspectives. This one is from the roundabout, and it kind of gives you an idea of how much glazing is adjacent on the sides of the building, so that you can see that it's still a very open and welcoming building, slightly a little more iconic and more of a draw. And then this is the driveway entry. Right here would be the mechanical yard. We did essentially screen it, and we added brick detailing reminiscent of book shelving, and we added additional materials for to break up the elevation as well to make it a little more inviting. So I'll go through the items now. The proposed alternative design will achieve the intent of the standards from which a deviation is sought to the same or higher degree than the subject standards. We feel we have maximized the glazing as much as possible. The UDO states it should be 45%, and we're hovering at 37%. We do feel like the extra brickwork and metal panel design help add to the elevation. It's just not a transparent solution. The proposed alternative design is consistent with the comprehensive plan and advances the goals of this ordinance to the same or higher degree than the standards from which a deviation is sought. Again, this goes back to trying to keep an open and active area between the buildings with the necessity of locating the mechanical room on Town Hall Drive. Which was the driver there. Item C, the proposed alternative design will impose no greater impacts on adjacent lands than would occur through compliance with standards from which a deviation is sought. Again, we feel like we did have an open, inviting building. We have lots of glazing that allows views into the building and out of the building, which we feel is the primary driver in the requirement. And we also added the brickwork and metal panel again. The proposed alternative design, item D, the proposed alternative design will not negatively impact public health and safety. Again, we have added some public gathering areas, and we feel like that is a greater benefit than the actual windows into the building. Item E, the proposed alternative design will provide one or more of the following public benefits to an extent that exceeds the requirements of this ordinance and any other local, state, and federal laws that is sufficient to compensate for the requested deviation from standards. And not to repeat myself yet again, but we feel like we do have a welcoming and transparent retail-like element with the building. The patrons are sort of on display, especially in the evenings, and it's still very transparent, even though we do have some opacity.
Can I say a few things?
Yes.
Sorry, I always jump in here.
No, please.
So, what's the challenge we tasked the designers with? As you've seen in this configuration, the intent is to activate this inner zone, as well as you'll see sidewalks creating those pedestrian routes that, as this block gets developed, is going to be connecting all the pedestrians to the remainder of the block in the next 10 years is the intent. So it's 8,900 square feet. It's not a very big building, but somewhere we have to put the mechanical systems in. Unfortunately, in the restrooms, and it was tough to put glazing in that. So we tasked them with, I know we're close, let's try to get as close to the UDO as we can. And we had many conversations with this. We sat down with the town as well, and we got pretty close, including transparent glass as well as spandrel, which you'll see that kind of that darker gray is what we call spandrel glazing. It's made to look like glass, but in all fairness, it's not transparent, and that hurt us because it didn't get us to that percentage. But our intent was to try to give you that feel that there's a lot of glazing there. And we did quite a bit of exercise. I think we made, how many renderings and exercises do we do in the brick here? But try to bring out some detail. What you see, those little dark vertical lines are actually brick, but it's recessed, and there's a play in how the surface is against each other. So we actually pull some space, some of it back, push some of it in, just to give you that shadow effect and really break up that mass. And then we introduce another material just, again, to give you a little bit of variety along that elevation so it doesn't feel like a one blank wall. But it was I know they didn't like me because we did a lot of exercises, but again, some perspectives. You'll see the glass on the end, on both ends for that matter. If you can imagine you're in Town Hall Drive, you're driving up, looking through that into the central area. So visually, it's really to tie you into that connection to the inside of that demonstration project.
And it might be worth noting that it is a southwest exposure of the building, and it's kind of a harsh light for libraries. They tend to need indirect light whenever possible. That's why we are lighting it from above with clerestory windows for the most part, but we do still have, windows on the ground level for reading areas. Item number 7, we are requesting an alternative equivalent compliance on the required visible light transmittance and reflectance per section 5.9.10.C.7.C. We currently have a very energy efficient low E glazing specified for the project. It is 64% visible. It has 64% visible light transmittance instead of the 65 that's currently required on the UDO. We feel like we have found the best energy efficient glazing for the visible light transmittance. Can't even say it today. The visible light transmittance is actually the amount of light that enters. It's transmitted from the exterior to the interior. So it really doesn't have a lot to do with the interior transparency of the glass. And we are suggesting that the 1% difference is not really visibly identified. We do have an option of upgrading the glass to a higher visible light transmittance. Instead of 65, it would be 71%. But this cost comes at a cost of about 15% more, which would not be in the budget of the project. And it's also not quite as energy efficient. I do have samples of these glass that I'd be happy to share with you. But this is the glass that we're proposing, which is a very clear, transparent glass, very energy efficient. And this is the step up. There's little to no difference between the visibility between them, but this is 7% clearer than this. And we're just talking about a 1% difference, and that's why we were proposing to use it's called Solar Band 70 glass. So the proposed alternative design will achieve the intent of the standards from which a deviation is sought to the same or higher degree than the subject standards. And again, going back to comparing the glass, if the AEC isn't accepted, we could certainly go to the more expensive glass. However, we're currently over budget as it is, and it'll be very difficult to find the funds for. Item B, the proposed alternative design is consistent with the comprehensive plan and advances the goals of this ordinance to the same or higher degree than the standards from which a deviation is sought. Again, we feel there's no perceivable visual difference between that 1% difference. And we would challenge, and we just haven't been able to locate another glass that wouldn't be far more expensive. Item C, the proposed alternative design will impose no greater impacts on adjacent lands than would through compliance with the standards from which a deviation is sought. Again, we don't see a perceivable difference between the proposed glass and the minimum required transparency. As shown, we feel it's a very transparent glass. It's very non-reflective. It's far below the acceptable reflectivity for glass. You guys allow up to 20% in the UDO, and this is at 12%, I believe. So the reflectivity is very low, so you are able to have nice views into the building and from the building. Item D, the proposed alternative design will not negatively impact public health and safety. Kind of the same thing. We don't feel like there's any difference between the 1% difference, and it's still a very clear and non-reflective glass, not affecting any health or safety. Item E, the proposed alternative design will provide one or more of the following public benefits to an extent that exceeds the requirements of this ordinance and any other local, state, federal laws that is sufficient to compensate for the requested deviations from standards. Just to sum up, that we feel we've created a welcoming and transparent view of the retail space of the library, and that the adjacent ends are very open and should compensate somewhat for the lack of glazing on the southwest elevation. We added the additional brick detailing and metal panel detail to liven up the elevation. That's about it.
Solar heat gain, can you speak about that?
Solar heat gain, the proposed glass has, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one, a 0.27 solar heat gain factor. The more expensive glass is not quite as energy efficient, and it does increase your operating costs of the building. It's at 0.30. Not a huge amount, but it does make a difference in the way the mechanical system is designed and how it operates.
Thank you. And the reason I brought that last item up, we're tasked, the Wake County Energy Commission requires us to present twice to them during schematic design and as well as during design development, which we did so. And we were challenged early in schematic design. You have a lot of glass here. What kind of exposure is it? You're getting a lot of solar heat gain. So I just want you to understand that we do consider these items very much. And we are off by 1% on transparency, but we're gaining in other factors in the sense we're more energy efficient as a facility now. And just so that you know, we're energy conscious. And there is a big jump to go to that next product for the solar gain. And like Christine says, we're right at the cusp of the budget, and it'd be very difficult. So it's always a balance between energy efficiency, budget, schedule. And those are the project nightmares. That's what I go to sleep and have nightmares at night as a project manager. But that's the last AEC item. So I can go through each one and summarize quickly, or we can just open it up to questions at this point. What would be your preference?
I'm going to suggest that we open it to questions.
Okay.
And the challenge for us is going to be confining our questions to the matter of the findings. We may ask for your indulgence after the formalities are finished, because I'm sure a lot of us have questions about the library itself. But so if we can, as a board, try and separate those things. So let's keep to the formal part. Any questions or even cross-examination on whether or not they've met the findings? Let's start with Tim.
So we're talking, so I guess my question, several of these things hinge on the benefit to the public. And let's talk about these gathering spaces outside. So one of the gathering spaces, I guess one is really the front, back, whatever the door, the main door of the library. Correct? Because it's not really well delineated out on some of these plans.
Here comes the expert right now.
You're correct. One of the gathering spaces is, and I wish I can zoom in to this.
So it's this
but-
green area with the little triangle there, right?
So-
that's really a walkway, so that's not really a gathering area. That's where people are walking into a building.
Well, there will be benches, bike racks, trash receptacles. The flagpole will be located there. So you've got some handicap parking. You've got book drop parking in that area. This is the front entry to the building right here.
And then the other one is over by Carolina Street.
The other one is over by Carolina
There's no
Street.
entrance to the library there. So that isn't really helping the communication with the library to the rest of the larger town center site or pulling anybody in. That's just sort of a side little area that's a area, right?
I would think that it would. You've got a gathering space. You will have seawalls in that area, some plantings in that area, specific pavers, but then there's this long sidewalk that goes along to the north side of the building that would actually bring people into the front entry of the library as well.
Right. So I guess so. The question is, is there any sort of restrictions, or is there going to be any restrictions, or is it to stop the library from saying no, people can't gather here? What if kids start gathering there? What happens with the schools? Wake County in general doesn't mind taking public money and taking land for public money and putting a great big fence and big mean signs up that say "Stay off our property." Right. So I'd sure hate for this that this is part of several of these things for now later on to have security guards out there keeping people away.
Sure, and we talked that quite a bit with the town, and actually that we're not allowed to put a sign that says just library. And your previous question, if I just may for a second, I want you to remember this is going to be a mixed-use space, what's developed around it. So remember that sidewalk there. I want to jump to another image. Yeah. This right here is mixed use. So think about, instead of, I know it looks like an orange block right now because that's what it is, but think about that as commercial space, storefronts. So what you're going to see is this space really gets active, and this is an old demonstration plan, so this library isn't the correct configuration.
And I'm definitely thinking about that because what's going to happen is people are probably going to use it. It might not be library patrons, and so that's my concern is, on one hand, you're asking for, hey, this is one of the reasons why we should be able to deviate from what the rules are. Let's just make sure that down the road that doesn't become something that really isn't available anymore.
The only thing I will say that we're pretty setting our haunches on here, I guess, is that the right English terminology? Is just a few parking right here, is ADA parking, and we do have a book drop over. Right. So we're really saying, that's for the library use. We don't want somebody just parking there and taking advantage of an open spot when we have to have a book drop show up, Right. We want to make it easy to the library patrons in that sense. But everything else is, as you indicated.
So there's no other going to be any delineated parking. I mean, because, I know part of the downtown area is obviously you want to have walkability, and so you don't necessarily want to have the same parking that you would everywhere else, but, you're already kind of at a deficit of 16 spaces from what you need day one. So, there could be some conflicts there, but hopefully that'll sort of work itself over time if they build a parking deck or some other structure.
And I would hope that this gathering area here would almost be like a phase one to this whole future development. That would eventually extend when the demonstration area would be designed and built. That's what my hopes would be, that would kind of be extended into a public pedestrian plaza that would kind of energize this whole area and support the retail uses as well as the library.
And I guess my other question was about, you're talking about the being able to see into the library. What are the hours of the library? Or what would they typically be on a building like this?
Typically they open 10 and close usually at 9.
Okay, so it would be open pretty late. You'd be able to see light coming out of it. It wouldn't be dark at, say, 6:30 or 7 and kind of be a black hole, so that's good.
Actually, I'm pretty excited. I mean, now that we're entering wintertime, the amount of glazing and the high glazing, the clear story, really is going to make it glow nicely, I think. And again, the visibility between the roundabout through the facility is really going to be appealing. Maybe I'm biased because it's the Wake County project, but
that kind of hit most of what my questions were.
Thanks, Lee.
Just very briefly, during that discussion, it kind of reminded us that we did not, as we were
Talking about process, discuss the ability to place conditions on the approval because this is a quasi-judicial type of application that is an option that's available to you. So, for example, if you wanted to put a condition on the approval that that the public plaza remain open to the public for public use, you could do that. That's just an example, but conditions are something that you can consider with this application.
Are there any conditions currently if we don't place them on there now? And they sort of alluded to the fact that maybe there was, but I don't.
The deviation request would be approved as presented. The plans that are before you will be part of the record, but there wouldn't be any additional conditions unless you work that into a motion. The council agreed and
Right.
Michelle? Arlene?
Well, I hope this meets all the criteria for asking a question. A little worried about that. My question was about the fenestration on the southwest side. I understand why you put the mechanical stuff there because of the main entrance. And I also understand that nobody wants to look at the boiler room anyway. But I was just wondering, that's a lot of solid area there. And of course, it says it doesn't show what the landscaping and stuff might be and what the access might be. But at this point, is there any thought about what you might be putting in front of that to kind of soften it up or break it up a little bit?
We do have some lush landscaping along that entire face that kind of wraps around
Okay, so that would...
to the plaza area that we were just talking about. Some taller trees, some evergreens, so it stays green throughout the entire year. Some colorful seasonal flowers throughout the year. But then in addition to that, you're going to have your required street trees along Town Hall Drive and part of Carolina. And the ones on Town Hall Drive will actually be set into our property more because remember you have the 50-foot gas easement there, so they can't be located close to the right-of-way because we're not allowed. So they'll actually be located even closer to the building than what we would typically do.
So it would be like broken up a little bit. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And there is exterior lighting with emergency egress path there, so it is well lit.
Thank you.
Rob?
I think my questions are more informational, but somewhat relevant to the finding, questions around the parking. So the parking garage that's slated for across the street, I mean, is that an absolute that is going there? Is that a guarantee that there's going to be a parking garage there? Because with mixed use, I'm just concerned about the parking, where it's located, and what we're trying to fit into the rest of that space. It seems like I was in Dallas this past week and went to a similar mixed use area, and there was only a few parking spaces on the storefronts, which could have easily been a library just like this. And everybody has to go into the parking garage because they did have one. But when I think about the typical patrons of a library during the day, I'm thinking about moms with children, families going into a parking garage, and that being their way of getting to the library as a bit of a bother. And so I'm just, the number of spaces, just for clarification, do we meet that requirement, or is that something we're finding on still? I have the list of requirements right in front of me, so I can't remember if that was one of them or not.
I think they said they have 49. They did not meet the requirement as stipulated, but they, on the main, the one going in has 49, and the remaining ones are being used from the parallel parking around Carolina, Fox Street, and others.
Which will realistically be on the other side of this proposed development as it's drawn.
So if I may briefly,
Yeah.
as I mentioned, part of the interlocal agreement, we set the standards in interlocal agreements, and as you indicated, a lot of these users are moms with children or strollers and whatnot, and we indicate that the parking, once it gets designed, whether it be a parking deck or maybe the surface parking stays, has to be within a certain distance. And if a deck is constructed, it has to be kind of meet our criteria of, it's close enough to the individuals. We will always keep those spots right at the front, which are the ADA, book drop, and the facility per se. But the intent is to always have parking for patrons in that deck at a decent distance. I think what we limit is 200 feet typically. That's what we're looking at. And that's what we strive for in all our Wake County projects. Just to be transparent, that deck isn't set yet. They're still developing it. I mean, they've moved around multiple times, so it's hard to say where it's going to finally settle. This block, just to give you a sense of size, I believe it's 4.3 acres. So we're not looking at a huge amount of space or a very long distance to travel regardless from one corner to another. But hopefully that gives you a better sense of scale and what may happen in the future.
And they are meeting requirements for parking. The parking requirement is actually 6 spaces, so up to 65 or to have 5, but UDO is only 6.
The only other question I had was around the design on on the southwest side. Maybe my eyes are deceiving me, but the shadowing on the picture, it's hard for me to tell. I mean, is that like a uniform pattern, or is that just a random set of squares or rectangles aligned? I couldn't tell for sure.
It's very, if you do this.
That
yes,
one.
Yes.
There we go.
The recessed paneled areas are varied in size. It was trying to be a playful, a play on book, like a bookcase, indicating different size books and so forth. But yeah, they are not equal and symmetrical.
Okay, yeah, all right. Just trying to imagine what that would look like. But I guess as Harley's question, revealed, there will be enough variation there covering it. You probably won't see whatever is designed, and maybe the amount of variation that's planned isn't necessarily needed once you put everything in front of it. I don't know.
Well, as we spoke before, think of this almost as a layering. You have the town hall street, I can't even say it now. Town Hall Drive, excuse me. You have the sidewalk. You have some grass because of that easement. Then you have your first layer of trees coming up. Then you'll have some bushes, and then you'll have the play on the architecture itself. You have the metal panel around the restrooms. That's set back from the brick. So you get a lot of a layering effect, trying to create shadow lines, as you indicated, that really don't make it feel like such a mass. Again, and then we also played with the height of it, with the mass behind it, kind of to break up that volume. So.
And the large solar shade.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful design. Just trying to better picture that. That's great. Thank you.
Sanjay.
Thanks for enlightening us on the library itself. I had a couple of questions. Talked about car parkings. What about bicycle parking?
We're proposing bicycle parking at I'm sorry, we keep toggling back and forth, but we're required to meet the UDO's bike parking, and it is right next to the front door in this plaza area. And I believe it's 6 or 8 spaces. Off the top of my head, I can't remember, but it's 6 or 8 bike parking spaces for the 8,900 square foot building.
Knowing I live about the subdivision next to Jeremiah Street. So knowing the traffic of people who use, who walk over or who bike, they will be definitely more than 6, right?
Okay.
So what I encourage you to look at is perhaps, have a larger number of bike parking compared to car parking, right? That's something you should perhaps consider. Right?
Yeah, and I believe it is 8 spaces, not 6, but we can definitely
Still,
look into that.
6 or 8. It's compared to car and bike, the ratio is too skewed. Yeah. If we want to encourage more community walk-ups and parking, or rather walk-up kind of facilities, we need to think about more bicycle parking compared to car parking.
We can absolutely look into that. At this point, we're meeting the UDO, but we can always exceed
Understand.
it.
The second question I had was, is this a one-way drive from Town Hall to Foxgrove, or is it a two-way?
The parking, it's two-way. It's 24 feet wide. So it's two-way. So you can access from Foxglove or Town Hall Drive.
Is that going to, have you done any kind of analysis on, is that going to create, because these are parallel parkings, are people going to attempt, doing U-turns, right in there? Because that's my concern. If you do parallel parking and if they are one way, that's the most efficient way of doing it. But if it is going to be both ways, I fear people doing U-turns. And I know it's an opinion versus fact, but that's what I've seen in most places, that, I see a parking here, let me try and do a U-turn. Or let me try and get to Town Hall Drive here, rather than go further down and come back.
So just so I'm understanding, you're speaking about Carolina Street, correct?
No, I'm speaking the parking in between that you have from Town Hall Drive to Foxgrove.
Right here?
Yep.
Yeah, so that's not parallel. That's actually perpendicular parking. I apologize. Hopefully I didn't confuse anybody. So that's all perpendicular parking in the library itself. Your parallel parking is going to occur on the roadways. And I see your concern, because if I'm coming at this road and I see a parking spot, I've done the UE. But what they've done on the Carolina Street design is provide a long median to try to get people past that roundabout and into the demonstration area before you have that opportunity. But just to be clear.
This is perpendicular parking.
Yes, sir.
Yes, so it would be a 24-foot drive aisle with perpendicular 18-foot deep stalls on both sides.
Okay.
Virtually the same as what you have in the parking lot at this building.
Yeah. I get it now. I was under the impression that was where you are doing parallel parking. I was trying to count how do you get to 69 in that space.
Sorry.
Okay. The other question I had was, again, this is perhaps informational only. Is the building considered the LEED? Does it meet the ratings from an energy point of view? The green building LEED ratings.
So
you talked about energy efficient buildings. So I was trying to wonder, where do we stand in that rating?
Wake County has always been challenged. We have several LEED buildings. We actually have a LEED. Is it platinum or LEED gold? Silver for the Justice Center. And as LEED progressed, we've had a challenge meeting that. So what Wake County decided to do, let's make energy efficient buildings. And regardless if it's LEED or not, we got to pursue certain items so that we've met that standard. Regardless, we always meet the ANSI requirements for mechanical design. So we feel that even though we can't say we're a LEED gold or a LEED silver or LEED certified, I would say that we're almost there regardless. It's been tough for us to follow, especially smaller buildings. It's been hard for us to follow and meet that full LEED certification sometimes, especially with the changes that it's involved as LEED has progressed. It's constantly evolved, and it's been hard to keep up the pace with that. So as a standard, Wake County said, look, let's do energy efficient guidelines. We're going to present to the Wake County Energy Commission, get their response, and adapt those. For example, just so you understand, this building will be what they call solar ready. You say, well, okay, is it ready? Is it solar or what? Well, the intent is we did a study early on. What would it take if we put solar panels on it, And this building can carry solar panels, and we're actually providing conduit for the future when we do incorporate solar panels. So we've taken a lot of measures to try to capture as much energy efficiency and energy response to the concerns of energy usage in that sense. A lot of locally sourced materials. Now we have a new statute that we have to try to meet 70% native plants on site. Again, it's all in response to being respectful to the energy. But I'd be wrong if I told you we're meeting LEED certified at this time. But all I can say is that our intent is to meet energy efficient building, just because I think that's what the taxpayers would want. So.
We have LED lighting, we have an entry vestibule, and the bike parking is actually a key component in a lot of LEED certification. So it has a lot of the design principles that are utilized in the LEED certified building, but without all the paperwork and associated fees.
Yeah, I'm not a big proponent of paperwork, but the idea was to understand what kind of bar have we set ourselves, right? We talked about solar. I would have loved to see it being installed as opposed to being provisioned, because in any kind of government building or government endeavor, provisioning never happens. It never comes to fruition, right? It's also in corporate world as well. You provision, but it never happens. So that's the bigger thing is, if it can be done now, we are better off than postponing it to future. Yep.
So one of the advantages of speaking a bit later is most of my topics have been covered already. I want to thank the team for being here. I think I have some questions perhaps for Ms. Coates. The intention, the purpose of the UDO on fenestration, and Courtney, please chime in here to remind me. I think it was basically to make sure that we didn't end up with slab walls and lack of interest, rather than having buildings that we look into more just for architectural variety and reasonable.
The glass coverage was so that you could look inside, the pedestrian could look into the buildings while walking along the sidewalks. That was the intent for the percentage of glass coverage at the Main Street level, pedestrian Main Street level, I should say. There were other provisions with regards to architectural variability and how many linear feet, one type of design occurred before. So it wasn't one large building. Instead, it took on a look of more of a historic Main Street, where you had variability in height, variability in windows as different units, or buildings connected over time.
Good reminder. Thank you. So, Ms. Coates, I'm impressed by your playful image of the bookshelves and that brickwork. Have you thought about any sort of practical things like birds nesting, how you keep it clean, those sorts of things that maybe architects don't get to have to do 10 years down the road?
Well, we did have that discussion with the solar shading device. There were a few concerns about that, birds nesting and so forth. But Wake County has a very diligent maintenance program. We do have hose bib on the side of the building to clean when necessary. They did install tie-offs on the roof to clean the solar shading device and so forth. So they do care about their facilities. So I'm sure they will keep them clean. But,
thank you.
But that wasn't like a primary design. We were just trying to do a playful facade.
And on that same side of the building, which I think is the southerly aspect of the building, the awning that comes out, the horizontal piece at the top, does that help you during the summer to keep some of the solar gain down?
Yes, it does shade the windows at certain sun angles so that we can reduce the heat gain in the building and the excessive glare.
And so, thinking about the map that we got there shows it very nicely. I find in the summer it's the southwesterly sun and the westerly sun that really get you. And that's going to be towards the left-hand side of the building. Nice to have it open. It's nice to be able to see inside, but how tempted do you think the staff will be to install blinds and shades and ways to keep the solar heat out?
We actually do have fritted glass windows on that location to help some of the solar heat gain, but we also do have some I believe it's 5% open roller shades that are electric that can be put down as needed. But according to some of the solar studies we did, it really only impacted it for about an hour and a half a day. And the fact that they're electric means people will put them back up as opposed to manually having to open and close them.
Thank you. And then, Ms. Pfeiffer, presumably you're going to be planting deciduous trees that help to keep the sun out during the summer but let the light through in the winter.
Yes, and I think it'll be a combination of deciduous and evergreen along that face of the building. You're speaking of the west,
Yes.
correct? But we also don't want to cover up the beautiful windows that they have. So, we put taller material where they've got brick and no windows in the lower plant material in front of the windows.
When we look at the plantings going around there, we don't want to completely cover up what we're trying to see as an entrance to
Right.
our town square, but
Absolutely.
maybe accentuate and open up even more so the window side on the Carolina Street side, so there's a lot of visibility into that at the street and car level, whereas the blocked side almost, right, if you will have maybe some more of those plantings.
Right. Same here, and that's kind of what we have proposed. And it's kind of, for lack of a better term, cool that the east side where along Carolina Street, where you'll have the tall windows, kind of spills out into that gathering area. So it's kind of just meshes together.
Providing, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just one thing I hate about site plans sometimes, it's so 2D, you know?
I know.
I mean, sometimes some of the trees selected will actually have, the actual massive leaves will happen at a higher elevation. Mm-hmm. So if you think about it as a pedestrian walking past it, you see the building clearly, and it still provides a shade because the majority of the trees, leaves, and branches and canopy, that's the word I was looking for, the canopy is higher. So,
That's right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Depending on how you maintain them.
Anybody else have any questions?
Just one follow-up on the parking component. As relates to the parallel parking on Jeremiah Street, the 49 spaces, was that solely for the parking 1 or 2 story deck that's going to be there versus the ones that are in the middle?
That's strictly for the middle.
So that's just the middle. That has
That's
nothing to
just
do
the
with the
middle.
deck at all.
And think about it this almost as a phased project, if you will. Our first phase, which is just the library, we needed those 49 plus the 20 on the perimeter parallel to meet our, I guess, capacity for a typical library of this size. The deck is 350. I can't remember the numbers. It's quite a bit more parking. And the way it's discussed in the ILA, library patrons will be able to use the deck freely. So
the second follow-up question on that is, with those spaces, in the long term, will any of those be dedicated solely to library patrons, or will they be first come, first serve, anybody can get that? And I'm thinking as you get to the future build out, do we lose something there?
So once it's fully developed, it'll be, our understanding is that because it's going to be a mixed use, and I'm probably speaking way ahead of, there'll be apartment buildings or there'll be residences, and some of those parking spaces will be assigned to residences, but the lower levels of that parking deck will be a shared parking, so those library patrons will be able to use that as well as individuals visiting the shops per se.
I did have a follow-up question. So could you pull back the elevation towards the Town Hall Drive that you had?
Sure.
Yeah, right there. So what's the height of the mechanical room up there?
The mechanical screen wall is about 14 feet tall.
Yeah, no, what got me thinking about your questions was, from at least from here, it seems that the top is kind of flat, right? And and there is a gap between those and the top level ledge. And if we plant trees up here, I'm sure during fall, whatever things fall up there, or any other stuff, right? What's your plan for cleaning those things up? Or is it just, accumulates there and if you are further down Town Hall Drive, you can see what's accumulated up there.
Mr. Dahara, I'll say you are welcome to answer, but I'm going to caution that I think we're beginning to venture down a path
Sorry.
that is not in accordance to the findings. I will say, though, after you make a recommendation, if you have questions like that, I'm sure they'd be more than happy to answer them. But I just caution that we are heading down a territory that most likely does not meet the findings.
Okay.
Well, I'll just be transparent. My toughest customer is Wake County General Services. They're very strict, and this project actually is reviewed by them because in the end, I just put it up, and they have to maintain it. We're really diligent about our facilities, and every facility is assigned a gentleman or a lady per se that from General Service to maintain the facility. So much so that sometimes we actually add items to the project to make that maintenance easier. So.
We do have 2 roof access ladders and an additional exterior ladder to get to the upper roofs to, take care of any type of roof drain, clog or anything like that. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that was a public health and safety question. So if the board agrees, what I'd like to do is to close the public comment session. I think we're ready to do that. So we'll formally close that public comment session. And then motion as to whether or not we think the findings have been justified. We can crave the indulgence of our 4 guests tonight. We might have some other questions. So we have a cheat sheet for the motion. Anybody would like to jump in and take advantage of that cheat sheet?
I don't know if we wanted to have any discussion as far as what I brought up and what Michelle had mentioned, any restrictions as far as the outside areas and where exactly that would fit into this.
Sure.
Anybody else is in favor or against that?
I was thinking that if we approve this, we should ask for additional parking, bike parkings to be added as a condition. That's my recommendation for all of you to consider.
I'd like to sort of formally suggest.
So I guess my question is how that, I would just like there to be some sort of restriction, just stating that those are public areas designated, for the use of all people using that area. I don't know exactly how to phrase it, or where that would go in with, we would just say that, I moved to do all this and with this following condition, and then.
Essentially read the draft motion as written and then, subject to the following conditions. I would further elaborate and indicate that any condition offered up by the Planning and Zoning Board should be something that's needed to meet a finding that you don't believe would otherwise have been met.
Right, so I feel like this particular one, because it is sort of the crux of several, I feel like that would be relevant, correct? Okay.
So would you phrase it something like the open spaces will not be restricted for public use? Is that how you would phrase that, Lee?
I suppose that would be one way. I don't know if. I'll make an attempt here and we'll go from there. If anybody has any questions about it or whatever.
Okay, let's try that. Go ahead.
Okay, I hereby move to recommend approval of Resolution 2018-388-0, approving an alternative equivalent compliance application for Wake County Public Library to be located at 310 Town Hall Drive, AEC 18-01, based on the findings of fact in the petitioner's application packet and presented at the October 15th, 2018 public meeting and public comment section of the Planning and Zoning Board with the following condition: that the public spaces that are relied upon in these requests will remain open to the public. With the following condition that the open spaces referred to in this application remain open to the public.
Anybody else like to suggest any additional conditions?
Can I ask something? Is this the right time to ask a question about that?
You're not, but go ahead anyway.
I just wanted to make sure that I understand the intent and we're totally fine with it. I guess the question is to make sure that it indicates the exterior spaces,
okay,
and not the public space, because the library itself is a public facility, and I don't. If that makes sense, I'm sorry to.
I mean, should I start over or just revise just the condition?
Just the condition.
All right, so I'll revise the condition to state that the outdoor public gathering spaces that are referred to in this application are to be remaining open to the public.
Thank you. Sorry.
That's good.
Okay, let's have a motion in a second. Any discussion of that motion? And I'm going to do a shorthand repeat of it. It's the bit that's as written with the following condition. The outdoor open spaces remain open to the public. All in favor of the motion say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Motion is carried. And thank you very much. Any more sort of informational type questions while we've got these wonderful experts here?
Thank you.
The only bone to pick I would have with the project manager is that your history starts in 2007. Mine goes way back before then. We've been asking for this library since at least 1995. So.
Oh, I apologize. If you can imagine, the bond was passed in 2007, and we're at 2018. Escalation costs. It's a challenge. So, but I apologize, and we're excited to be working with the town of Morrisville, and it's going to be a good time. It's going to be fun.
So, presuming everything goes well and you are all approved in November, how long is it going to be before we see the inside of the building?
Sure. So
28.
we've no, easy now. We've built a lot of community libraries, and from start to finish, it's about 365 days. It's about a year, and then it takes about a month and a half to get all the books in, the computers in. Our intent for opening is December of 2019. And we would like to start construction. Well, I should say we plan to start construction if everything goes well, end of November. So
That's a great time to be digging up dirt.
Yeah, good time to open a library. Nothing else to do.
well, I'm doing a Fuquay Varina library, and we were digging dirt, and we still got hammered by so much rain. So it's really a gamble nowadays. But
That's why, I was a general contractor before, so I wouldn't relish starting a project like this in November.
I'm sure he accounted for that in his bid.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
thank you very much. I appreciate it.
So the night is young. Next item on the agenda will be item 11, which is the work session about signage.
Take a 2-minute bio break before we start the next one.
Bio break? I've never heard it called.
Say that all the time.
So we'll reconvene in about 5 minutes. So back to item 11.
I'd probably give you that.
Courtney, one of your favorite topics.
After the meeting, I'll have to tell you my little confession about this topic.
Are you putting up signs everywhere?
I'm not really putting signs up at all. Okay, so this is really, I'm going to take you back a couple of months ago. There was a complaint from an HOA here in Morrisville because they were issued a citation for their tube man. And if you don't know what the tube man is, he's the inflatable guy that kind of waves. So he was first told not to use it anymore, continued to use it, and was issued a citation as a result. as a general rule, we give warnings, you ignore our warnings, you're then issued a citation. It's kind of the general thing. So he filed a complaint with council. Council then had a roundtable, which is where basically they bring topics, and if there's a consensus to move forward on more work, that happens, or it could just kind of die kind of right there, the topic. Well, there was a consensus from 4 to explore how to allow tube man in the code to address this HOA's concern. At that meeting, I will say staff stated we strongly did not support the inclusion of tube man for a variety of reasons, but we still agreed to continue exploring it. So at the council meeting earlier this month, I brought back the topic again, and I brought back some options. This presentation is the exact same presentation that I provided to them, but really at that point, the consensus was they wanted to explore option 2, and I will say staff supports option 3. So we're kind of at an impasse. They were looking at ways to continue the discussion, and they talked about potentially sending it to the Public Safety Advisory Board, at which point I reminded council that the job of regulations is this board's job, and that this was the appropriate place to really provide feedback and discussion on the topic at hand. So a little bit of background history. So the Unified Development Ordinance was adopted in 2013, and ultimately was effective July 1st of 2014. At the time of its adoption, it was generally consistent with general statutes as well as case law, and it establishes which signs are permitted and which signs are prohibited. And it also goes as far as to say these types of signs are allowed. Fascia, which are your wall signs, ground signs, and temporary signs. And then it breaks down the temporary signs into very specific categories. You have real estate, promotional, light pole. There's a variety of others, but those are just kind of 3 examples. And then you look at the kind of the purpose of what the signs are, the UDO. And the purpose is important. If you look back, and for anybody that was in the area at the time, somebody wrote something on the side of their house with spray paint and carry. Was it protected under free speech, what they wrote? Or was it truly a violation of Cary's code? The case was won, it was appealed and continually won based off the purpose. So it was the purpose of their sign code that allowed them to win the case that said, you know what, the phrase that was spray painted on the house didn't conform with sign regulations. If you wanted that statement, you needed to pull the appropriate sign permit, install it at the ground, or whatever have you. So for us, our current and the UDO today, and honestly, if you look at our draft sign code update that we're working on, the same 4 provisions are there. They're just put underneath kind of an overall arching topic of we believe in the First Amendment and our right to free speech. However, here are kind of the standards and for the purpose, I should say. So really, it's to encourage the use of signage as a means of visual communication. It's also to safeguard vehicular, bicycle, pedestrian traffic. So really to minimize distractions to motorists and prevent obstructions or interference with traffic signs or signals. This is why often we don't allow signs in the right-of-way. If I'm standing and holding a sign in the right-of-way, I very well could cover up a stop sign. And so the goal is to make sure that people are not interfering, or signs are not interfering with the safety signs that are in place. Let me see if I can move this somewhere. And then it's really to kind of preserve property values. Having a sign that's unsightly, it's falling apart, visual clutter, that can impact property values. So that's another reason that we have our purposes. And the last is really to minimize the possible impacts from signage on adjacent and private properties. So for example, let's say I am running for office and I want to be mayor. And I'm allowed unlimited size signs, the size of every single house. I put one up, my neighbor puts one up, and we continue down the road because I'm just happen to be popular and everybody wants to put one of these signs up. But they're really large and distracting. At what point do you start to impact adjacent property owners because of the size of the sign, because of the content of the size? And that's really what that's getting at as well. Moving forward, there was a Supreme Court case in 2015, and it really kind of turns our code upside down in some ways. And what it stated was the First Amendment prohibits governments from regulating the content of a sign. So if I see a sign in the ground, I have to say, how was it installed in the ground? Is it permanently installed or is it temporarily installed? I can't look at it and say it's a real estate sign. I can't look at it and say it's a garage sale sign. I can't even look at it and say it's a promotional event sign. I'm having, a 30-day sale on red balloons. They're discounted. So it's really getting at that. But what it did say is that we can continue to regulate the size, the height, the time, the placement, and we can distinguish between commercial and non-commercial signage. So commercial is, kind of what you're getting at. It advertises products, whereas non-commercial is religious, political ideology, any type of ideology. So, in theory, I can put, my neighbor who's X degrees to the left is a horrible human being in my front yard. If it doesn't fall underneath under slander, the question is it protected under free speech? And so that's really what this is getting at. It's based actually off of a church. I think it was a normal place of worship. And they had different posting signs than other type of non-commercial speech, and that's what really got at the heart of this case. And then we can regulate on and off-site. So, if I have a business that's having a sale, I can post it, in my business property limits, but I can't go and put it 2 miles down the road. So really what happens, and I think the easiest way with this case is I can no longer read what's on it. And that's kind of what this visual gets out. It's clear when it's, on a wall, it's clear when it's on the ground, but how do I distinguish between the top two on the right-hand side? Because clearly one was non-commercial and the other one was commercial, and now we can't really kind of pay any attention to the content of it. We have to say it's a temporary sign that's attached to stakes that goes into the ground. So, sign enforcement. Whether you realize it or not, we have proactive enforcement, and I'm pretty sure we probably tell somebody to pull a sign almost every single day here. Signs are kind of like disease. The flu. I come up with the flu, the next person gets the flu, the next person gets the flu. It's the same thing. So one person has an illegal sign out there. I've noticed nobody picks it up on Saturday at 2 o'clock. The next person has one on Saturday at 2 o'clock. The next one on Saturday at 2 o'clock. I think it was 2 Fridays ago. I counted 6 signs, I believe, at an intersection, and they all happen to be 6 o'clock on a Friday, and they know when we work. And so I know that's why they all stuck them out there. And not a single one of them, I'm pretty sure, was permitted based off of just looking at what they were advertising at that point in time. So we really do regulate. I didn't put out all signs out there, but what I really put some signs that we've had over time that have been issued violations are the ones that move. And so we have kind of criteria of different ones that move. We have some that move by electrical means, which is the HOA 2-man sign, which oddly enough has another little illegal sign right below it, but we only find for the big blue one. We have had on top of movie theaters these large helium-filled ones that are attached to a string or two.
How'd you ticket the blimp?
So we usually go in and tell them they have 24 hours to take it down, and we will come back if they don't. We cite them. If we come back the next day and they still haven't, we usually cite them and we take their signs. And we continue, until they pay their fine. We hold on to their signs as kind of collateral. Most of the time people pick it up. I think we've had an instance where we pulled 100 signs for somebody and they did not want to play the $100 per sign violation. So instead they just let us keep the signs. That happens too. But there's lots of different types. This one here is very similar to the one above. It has an inflatable device in it. It's attached to the ground, and that's how those move by a mechanical device. We are not proposing anything, or council doesn't want to include anything such as streamers, such as the ones that are in the air, or spinners, or even people dressed as bears spinning, or even feather flags that we see so often. So that gives you a little idea of what we do and what we have been enforcing, and probably most people just don't realize it. And then the question that we are so often asked is, what are our neighbors doing? So Cary and Apex, they don't allow any moving signs at all, whether it's mechanical or by nature. Durham prohibits them in all zoning districts unless they're part of an approved temporary use in the downtown tier. Downtown is not located adjacent to our borders, so if you happen to head up to where Brugger's Bagel is located and you see signs out there, which occur quite often in Durham, they are all illegal. It's just they're not being enforced apparently, or if they are being enforced, they haven't been pulled. Holly Springs does not allow them in residential districts, and they do permit them in some commercial districts for grand openings only. And then Raleigh permits them in all districts. They do have limitations on the height, quantity, location, and duration. And I think part of this gets just down to preference. I live in Raleigh. I drive by some all the time. It's great to know when Sports Clips is having a sale. I'll admit it. I'll go and I'll get my kid a haircut at a cheaper price. However, the hurricane came through. Half of them are torn up and they're still hanging out in their current location. And that becomes a challenge. So then it is prevented, but now they're falling apart. So there's another enforcement element that comes along in play. And I think part of it with Raleigh is they're just so large. I mean, there's no way their code enforcement could proactively enforce signs. And there was a comprehensive conversation about expanding their allowed uses of signs as well. Now on to our potential options. So first option is to take our current code as we have today and modify it. So the way our current temporary sign regulations are set up is they're content-based, which remember we're not allowed to do per Supreme Court case. So basically, we have garden, real estate, promotional, and all that. So any regulations that we change would most likely apply for all signs. And then the standards for non-commercial and commercial signs are the same. So if we wanted to go through and allow these types of inflatables, we do have an option. We could add another inflatable option add an inflatable option of our temporary signs and potentially just kind of restrict it to that. However, it applies to commercial and non-commercial, and it will be across town. So if a religious association that currently is a tenant in Grace Park wanted to put one of these out there, so could Starbucks. They'd both have the right to pull a permit and install the sign.
Just going back to that, so that, assuming doing that means that this little blower man, who is only this big, this wide, but it really would be a height. So in theory, you could fill all of that height with something.
So it'd be the height and width, yes. And so I don't know exactly how wide the tube man is. 6 feet or so, I suppose.
For the arms, you mean, yeah.
So the thing to keep in mind, if it is in fact 20 feet tall and 6 feet wide, any inflatable can be 20 feet tall.
You could have that huge balloon that would also be that wide and that tall.
Yes. So either one of these could fit that same criteria. And part of it is I do need to figure out from the Downing Glen HOA what the actual height, because you can order tube men in 20 feet and 30 foot varieties. I can't tell from the picture. It's up close, so I don't want to guess. It's kind of like my fish. If I take a picture a certain way, it looks like it's huge. I don't want to guess that he is the 20 or 30 variety just by the trees in the background. But yes, you're right. It's the entire space that it could take up. So what changes would have to occur? So we would permit temporary signs to move by electrical or mechanical means only. We would continue to prohibit any other moving signs, such as flags and banners. We would measure this from the ground. So the Snoopy hot air balloon that you saw, that would not be allowed because we're going to measure it from the ground. And they're attaching it to a roof that far exceeds 20 to 30 feet anyway. We modified sign height to 20 to 30 feet. And again, modify the width to match Downing Glen. And then we would permit an installation period. If we're treating, and this is where it gets kind of difficult because we're content-based currently, do we continue to kind of violate that in some ways, or do we try to rectify it? And depending on which approach we take, we may end up with no installation period. So these could be indefinitely, or they could be for a limited period of time, depending on how it was drafted.
How can you have an indefinite temporary sign?
The duration of the event. I mean, my house is on the market for a really long time, and for whatever reason, it can't sell.
So they couldn't necessarily leave it up all the time. It would only be maybe
the duration of the event, and that's how some of them are defined. So, for example, I mean, we've had property that's been on the market the entire time I've worked here. In theory, if this was allowed for a real estate sign, it could have been out there for that entire period of time. But again, if we created a category, of inflatables by mechanical means, we could probably then set some limits on it that way.
So we'll go back to the rules here. So we're saying option one is to propose these particular changes, and they are applicable. All these options are applicable to both commercial and non-commercial.
For option one.
Just for option one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And okay, so we're basically saying that particular tube man, we're going to make it allowed. Anyone who wants to match that tube man can build one just like it for the duration of the event.
Correct.
All right, got it.
I mean, we could modify the time if we wanted to and not make a duration, but it depends on how it was drafted. But I think really kind of gets down to staff recommendation. So one, we don't recommend this. And there's kind of a couple of reasons. Really one of the big ones, this applies to commercial and non-commercial. So anywhere in Morrisville, anybody could have one of these. Depending on how it was drafted, there may be no installation time limits. It's inconsistent, in my opinion, with the purpose of the sign ordinance. And I think there's some questions of public safety that could potentially, if it deflated and covered a stop sign, or if it deflated, went across the road, that can happen. And then it's just not consistent with our other, adjoining jurisdictions. That's often so important to us, but yet we would be making a departure from that. And lastly, we're in the process of updating our code anyway to comply with the Supreme Court case. So this would be a temporary measure that we eventually would override anyway. So there's really a lot of energy that would go into amendment, with time energy, money energy, ultimately to change it anyway. Moving on to option two. So what makes this one a little bit different is we could write it under the proposed code so that it only applies to non-commercial temporary signs. So this would apply to any neighborhood HOA, any churches, any religious institutions such as a temple, YMCA grand opening, school Halloween parties. Any of those users could use this. It's also, in theory, anybody in their own front yard, if they have non-commercial speech, would also potentially be allowed to do this. It does ensure that our regulations are content neutral. Remember, as I said before, we have different types of signs based off of real estate sign, promotional sign. We're moving to yard sign, sidewalk sign, swing sign, light pole banner signs. So we could add a category of, electrical, mechanical, inflated sign. And if we did do that, then it kind of creates definitive height and width that would only be applied to these inflatables. Again, it does create different standards for commercial and non-commercial speech, and then it establishes the same non-commercial speech throughout Morrisville. So one of the big takeaways that we need to have is we can treat commercial different. So we have commercial for residential, commercial for non-residential, commercial for mixed use. They all get categorized in that commercial speech. I mean, advertising my residential development sign. All those can be treated differently based off the land use type. Whereas non-commercial speech, there has to be standards equivalent across the board. So that would be important here. So the proposed changes, we would permit non-commercial temporary signs that move. We'd also prohibit all the ones that move by atmosphere. Again, we'd modify to 20 feet, 30 feet, depending on what size the tube man is today, and to modify the width as well. And then we can clearly establish a maximum period. So for example, we may allow it, but we only allow it for one 24-hour period a year. Maybe we allow it 4 times a year for one 24-hour period. So then we can start to put limitations.
How about per property, I guess?
Correct. So, the question is, is it per property or is it per tenant? I mean, that's where it gets, because if you think about, let's just use Park West Village, for example. I mean, I know it's a commercial example.
But this is for non-commercial.
But they, in theory, could have 4 nonprofits doing something there. So all 4 at the same time, in theory, could have the signs out. Then staff recommendation. So we don't recommend option 2 because, again, allowing inflatables is not generally consistent with the purpose of our sign ordinance. It permits really tall signs, 20 to 30 feet. The reality is 20 feet's 4-ish of me. And then, 30 feet's would bring me up to, 6 of me. And to give you an idea, Savannah, up to about midway up the roof line's about 35 feet. So you would have signs that would be as tall as basically the top of their second story. Stories are 10 feet approximately. So think of a taller house, think of how tall it is, and that you could have those there. And then the last one, and this is the one that staff supports, is, we think that in some ways all signs should be treated equally. This option also ensures the regulations are content neutral. We will continue to establish different standards for commercial and non-commercial speech. And then we would also continue establishing non-commercial speech standards that are equal throughout town. However, we at the Heart just don't recommend this. Since 1990, we haven't allowed moving signs, and that has not inhibited our growth. It has not inhibited our economic development. And I don't know of any horribly unsuccessful events that occurred because they weren't allowed to use any type of inflatable sign. We have lots of other sign options that are available. One of the big provisions of the UDO, we went from 30 to 60 days for some temporary signs. We added light pole signs. So we have a lot of people who have their parking lots that put light pole banners. Once they have the bracket locations approved, to make sure they meet certain safety standards, they can continue changing out the content of those signs at any given point. So there are other options available. So staff still remains at option 3. We're looking for your direction because council does prefer option 2 with some parameters and is seeking input from this board.
Let me ask you some general questions, if I may. We know that we're working on a new sign code. I mean, that was the purpose of the consultant about a year ago. How far away are we from that? And would that new sign code mean that we wouldn't have to discuss this anymore?
I think with the new sign code, it depends on what we put in it. I mean, so yes, we could in fact add inflatables as a temporary sign use. So we could either say, yes, that's what we want and have a recommendation and develop it that way, or we can say, no, we don't recommend that from both the staff level and the planning and zoning board level, and we can take 2 versions to council, and they can choose the version they want to adopt. So, I mean, we can allow them. It's not that we can't allow them under the new code. We can, just understanding that all non-commercial speech would be eligible to use these inflatables.
Okay, but aren't we working with a consultant to come up with?
Correct.
So
and
what's
it is
the time
not
frame for that?
recommended in there to include these. No. Our initial draft has it the same way it's had it since 1990, not to allow moving, waving by electrical or natural means, because that is consistent with the purpose of the sign code.
Because of this distracting part of it. Is that, so, remind me, we got here because what was the purpose of the floppy man in Downing Glen? I mean, what were they using it for?
To advertise blood drives.
So,
Blood drive for like a couple days?
full disclosure, I'm a resident of Downing Glen. So there are only 2 times a year that the tube man is put up. Is really once during the blood drives, right, to just get people to come over, and one is during our annual community, cookout celebration and those things. So it's really as a means to.
It's like an event is happening today.
It's an event is happening today. Come over, and it is also put into a common parking lot so that it's next to a swimming pool where it doesn't interfere with day-to-day activities. Right.
Problem is that's the most innocent version of what would happen.
Right.
If it's an approved anytime you want it option.
Right. But when I was reading through this and I looked at option 2 and option 3, right? Go to.
The slinky man can say anything that someone wants to put on there, and wants to take legal responsibility for putting on there, right?
I mean, they're in the new code. There is a
If
thing
we allow all
regarding,
non-commercial, I mean, yeah.
you know, offensive language.
Yeah.
Um,
But I could say, yeah, my neighbor.
I mean, you could say Courtney is a horrible planning director, and that does not qualify as offensive language.
Right.
I mean, you're making a statement, you know, your ideological statement, if you will. So yes, I mean, that could happen, you know, and people could put that in their front
But
yard.
that could happen
they
even
could
on
do that.
existing sites.
But they can do that today. I mean, so they can currently put a sign in that, you know, Courtney's a horrible planning director.
Not a big 20, 30
It's
foot
just not a big 20-foot one that waves.
Yeah.
You know, from the standpoint, too, I mean, if you look at the banner signs that we have that we advertise in Bensville Town Hall Drive, those are eligible to HOAs as well. You know, when they're having a special event that they're bringing out people, there are other sign options that are available. The choice has been made and not to apply for those and put, you know, funds towards purchasing those. If we had been contacted, and I don't know if we were, if we had been contacted and we were asked whether or not you can have one of these, we would have said no. You know, but I can tell you, I've lost count of the number of inflatables that people have purchased, or balloons, you know, these rubberized balloons or plastic balloons that you see now stuck out. I've lost count of the number that they purchased them without asking first, and we have not granted any waivers for anybody. We did reduce the fine. We always reduce fines for first-time offenders, but if it's continued to be installed, you know, I did make it clear to the council that we don't waive fines a second time. You know, so there is a choice to be made. If they only use it twice a year, they can pay $200 a year and pay the fine. I mean, so there are choices to be made, and we do have people who do that. You know, I certainly did not suggest that the HOA do that, but I have somebody who says, hey, I'm letting you know I'm putting it out. It's okay if you go ahead and fine me. I'll write the check ahead of time if necessary because it generates business and I'm okay with the cost. So,
Cool.
I mean, that's an option. Again, it's not
You're
one
playing
that
by the rules. That's okay.
It's not one that we advertise, but for this particular person, the revenue that they make far exceeds the $100 fine that they receive.
Yeah, but you know, I was looking at it even more in a general statement, that where it is for non-commercial purposes, as that option 2 points out, and just thinking out aloud. Why should I understand that we should have durations on how long it should stay, right? I'm completely on board with that. You have even the tube man, right? You have got 24 hours to put it up, you bring it down. If it is a 4-day event, you still have to have 24. You still need to get 4 different, you apply for it 4 times, you get 4 different, approvals to put it up there. But one of the greatest complaint I hear about Cary's code, and this one was where they control even the color of what the sign looks like. The frontage should be exactly the same, no matter what you are in. That goes to the other extreme of control. My question really is, how much regulation do we really want to put on many of these things, right? I do understand your concerns about safety and things of that nature, but given that these are mostly event-based signages, if you will, and mostly if it is HOA, churches, and other events, do we really want to block some of, from having them put in these kinds of signages? I can understand that tube man up there floating.
And I would say, no, I want them to be able to advertise. I mean, we currently allow signage promoting certain events in different locations, especially if it's like a running type event. So I think signage is an important form of communication, and I agree, requiring everything to be beige is not a good idea. Right. And we don't restrict color, but I think there also has to be, how many special event permits have we so far this year?
Last year, 54. We're into the 50s again this year. I don't know the exact number.
So each one of those, in theory, would qualify because a lot of them are nonprofits.
Obviously, there's a lot of, not trying to be Cary, but I think there's a lot of sort of urban legend about Cary and what they control. first of all, go to Hobby Lobby and tell me they control the color of signs. They have an orange sign on a lodge building.
Yeah.
So that, yeah. But I think Durham's actually, from a practical standpoint, even tougher than Cary. But I just don't see where there's a big difference between sort of over-controlling and allowing these kind of things, which could proliferate into a lot of areas that we wouldn't think about or wouldn't want them to be there. And I mean, it's hard to say why, I don't know, why we should allow these blowing signs when there's just the ability that they could suddenly crop up all over town. I mean, I personally think that we already are kind of in a toss-up situation with some of the way that we allow signs with like 50 little small signs on there that already kind of makes things look bad. I would think we could have a more strict sign ordinance, but
you're talking about mostly commercial ones, or the ones like the somebody standing for some office putting up there that sits there for days together.
I wouldn't want every church or every charitable organization and everybody else to have one of these bendy men either. I mean,
do we know what they cost, guys? Do we know what they cost? The average of these signs?
Maybe like $300 or something. Well, so you're talking two-man?
Two-man, these blowable.
Okay, so the signs for our rezoning signs, $15 is what we pay for them. I mean, we order kind of in bulk, so at max. I mean, if we didn't order in bulk, they'd probably be about $30 a sign. And they're about the size of a campaign sign. I think they may be a little bit bigger. But, I mean, that's to give you an idea. You also, so if you look at a lot of our banners, I don't think you realize it, but we recycle them. So you can create the banner and then you just purchase the strips where you change the date. I mean, so that's another option. You invest into the one set, X event, and then every year you can change the date. I would argue the challenge with this tube-man, I could not even tell you what it was for because I can't read it. I mean, I think it's a failed sign in many ways. I mean, is it a kid's birthday party? I mean, so that's kind of one argument. I mean, I'd also say if it failed, this thing could easily cover the crosswalk. You now are inhibiting ADA accessibility. Or what if I decided to drive over it and it went up into my car? Is an HOA then willing to pay the cost for car repairs for any damage? Or am I suddenly have to pay for it because I ran over it? And that's some of the challenges with these. It's the same thing with the sign spinners. People have fallen into the road and been hit by cars as a sign spinner. Because they're sitting this fine, or sign goes rogue and they nail a car. So there's some real safety concerns that come along with all of these. And there's always going to be some new sign that's going to come into play. Feather signs, I don't think they were probably on the market in this area 5 years ago. Now they're everywhere.
Yeah, but, I'm torn. I do understand those things. But you also have similar accident issues with signs that are, in the middle of the road, stuck around the sidewalk. You could easily walk over them or get hurt with those aluminum rods that are next to it, right? So
I don't disagree with that statement. And we don't have to allow those either. If there is a concern with all of that, we don't even have to allow those temporary types of signs.
And Sanjay, with all due respect to Downing Glen, which is our neighbor, I hate tube man. I hate any kind of tube man.
I'm not a fan of tube man either. But I'm just trying to have a discussion on, because when we take a look at it, your current thing says you cannot have banners, right? That's what anything that is movable includes the banners.
No,
right?
If you firmly, like this open house, the O Grand opening on the bottom, believe it or not. I don't know if they've secured it appropriately, but yes, you can have those. They can't have the flags that are attached to it, but you can have a banner. I mean, we have banners on Town Hall Drive. We have banners attached to the buildings all the time.
Okay. What about those flags on the left and underneath that?
So no, nothing in here is permitted except for maybe the sign behind the man holding the bear. There's a sign kind of put in the ground that may be allowed. I can't read what it is. And then the grand opening sign was most likely permitted. It was the flags that aren't permitted.
But what's the concern with the picture on the left hand side below?
The flat, they wave. They blow in the air and they wave. So it's about you not having anything that waves. It's balloons, it's feather flags. It's helium-filled balloons. It's the plastic balloons that wave that you'll see permanently affixed to the ground. They sell them in bundles.
But then why do we allow some of these things in commercial spaces to begin with?
We don't. We don't allow them at all. All these are illegal signs that we're told to remove.
What about the balloons? When somebody has a real estate house showing, they typically put balloons in
We will
front
tell
of
them, if they ask us, we'll tell them not to put balloons on. Currently we will tell them you're more than welcome to put, open house, kind of the main right of way, kind of as directionals getting to it, but you cannot affix balloons.
Yeah, I'll just read this section of the code to you. It says, any moving sign or device to attract attention, all or any part of which moves by any means, including floating, fluttering, rotating, or otherwise moving devices set in motion by movement of the atmosphere or mechanical, electrical, or other means, but not limited to pennants, flags, propellers, balloons, or discs, whether or not any device has a written message. All of those are prohibited. And if you look at the studies out there that look at signage, this kind of attention attraction device, it's very common for it to be prohibited because of driver distraction. And there are a lot of studies out there that talk to signage and driver distraction.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the purpose of Downing Glen or a small place where they want to put it in their neighborhood and attract attention to their neighborhood, there's a lot of better options to get that attention. If you really have to have something moving, dress up somebody in a nurse outfit. Have them sitting in the front of your
Drive doesn't.
That would sound more that is prohibited as well.
Than Slinky Man. I mean, so.
I mean, doesn't the Red Cross have a great big?
There are 1,000 better options than putting something that's ugly and large and potentially, distracting and dangerous, opening that Pandora's box to everybody else, who don't have quite as innocent of a purpose. And I think that's the ultimate, very good. I guess Town Council doesn't agree with that. Is that what I heard?
Town council
wants something approved.
There was a lot of discussion.
They prefer an approval.
I mean, there's discussion about it, but they want to explore it.
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of, as you pointed out, many of these guys go to events where many of these things are out there, or the organizations want to put things out there, and I see some of where their reasoning comes from or where their driver comes from, and this would not. I'll take another example. This would, if somebody is doing a event on the cricket ground, this would not apply, right? Because that's on Wake County grounds, correct?
We own it, so we have some planning jurisdiction. Is that correct? So some jurisdiction. We do have some jurisdiction in that area. So our sign code would apply?
Yes.
Yeah, so we would have jurisdiction in there as well.
Okay.
Just beyond that, just as a matter of practice, because we do own the property, kind of a condition to renting the facility is that you abide by our codes.
Yeah, I mean, to understand, even inflatables, when you see them at events, we require those to be inspected. And it's because they take flight.
Yeah.
So, there is lots of things where we require inspection. And I have not pulled all the signs, but we've had, to give you an idea, we've had a giant gorilla inflatable before. We've had a woman dressed up in her pajamas with a mattress before. In theory, I suppose you could turn it into an inflatable mattress and then have a person kind of dressed up too, trying to, I jest, but signs really are like a disease.
So what?
They multiply.
They
literally multiply.
And people will take advantage of it. If
they know what hours we typically work. We do sign sweeps randomly in the evening. We also do sign sweeps randomly on weekends. That's how, Downing Glen, it was one of our random, because we know people purposely try to skirt the system.
So, Courtney, can you take us back to your background slide? One that says U.S. Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm. There we go.
That's the one. So I just want to clarify that we can still comply with Reed versus Town of Gilbert ruling if we distinguish between non-commercial and commercial.
Correct.
So isn't part of the issue that we need to look at whether we should have some sort of definition of what's non-commercial and whether we want to make special exceptions for that?
And that's going to be part of the sign code update. It's part of that is kind of clarifying that these standards would apply for commercial, these standards would apply for non-commercial. That's part of the clarification.
So it's very easy for us to say then that for commercial, we absolutely don't want any moving signs.
Correct. It would be very easy for us to capture that.
Do you have difficulty distinguishing, or are there any gray areas between commercial and non-commercial?
I think some of our challenges where it's going to get a little gray, if you will, is so currently North Carolina statute with regards to political signs, and political signs really is a non-commercial speech. They have a completely different set of criteria.
So we go by the state, and so if
so there
the
we'll
state's
go by
in trouble,
the state.
Yeah.
So that may be a potential oddity with regards to street right-of-ways. For the most part, I mean, are you selling a product, or is it some nonprofit that's advertising an event? It's typically pretty clear, and you have to look at the applicant as well, since we can't really look at the content of the sign. But they're advertising, maybe they can give a description of what the sign would, entail, and they can say, we're advertising our blood drive.
But most of the issues you come across, or that are probably under discussion, are ones where people haven't applied for a permit. They haven't told you what they're going to do. It just happens.
Not always. We do have signs where they apply for one thing and they install something completely different.
So a 9-year-old putting balloons up for the lemonade stand, is that commercial or non-commercial?
Commercial.
I mean, the question is, are we going to even enforce it? I mean, did I really see those balloons? I mean, what profit are they making? I mean, at the end of the day, as a general rule.
But if the same 9-year-old gets a tube man from somewhere,
we would ask him politely just to please take it down, because it could distract divers, and we don't want anybody to get hurt while he sells his lemonade.
but in general, I have to scrape the barrel and find absurd cases then when you really have.
But technically, we could go and say, take your balloons down.
Well, here's one that may not be that absurd. You get these people going door to door. I don't know if it's a scam or not a scam, for magazines, saying that they're from some school or some charity, which you don't know. It doesn't appear to you. You don't know that off the top of your head. But so, is it really? Are they lying? I don't know. But is that a commercial or non-commercial? And could those people now set up in a parking lot somewhere, put up a tube man, and say that I'm selling scholarship magazines?
Well, and I think that's where you're going to have to get to. We can regulate the location.
Oh, well, whatever. I mean, maybe at any rate. I mean, just saying they could. There's a lot. I mean, there are some sort of weird edge cases, but I mean, I'm still just not a big fan of these tube men. Anywhere.
I would say, it sounds like most of us are against the tube for any particular purpose being allowed. But if there was to be a proposed option that did allow for it, if it was non-commercial, and if the maximum size is 30 feet, and it must be 30 feet from the closest road.
Well, it doesn't.
Right? Meaning that it couldn't fall in and affect traffic.
I mean, you could say that it's 30
Most people
feet
wouldn't
from
use it if they had to put it 30 feet
from
from
your
the road.
drive
That's what
aisle.
I'm saying.
I mean, you can regulate the location.
The point is they want to put it right on the road where it gets in people's way and the people see it. Take it 30 feet from the road for safety reasons, and that would be our suggestion.
The challenge, I would say, though, well, it makes sense based off the size of our lots. Say if I said it had to be 30 feet, it had to have a 30-foot fall zone. So basically it fell within a green area. How many places in Morrisville would that be applicable to?
Exactly.
And then you're calling it in question,
They could stick
have
it in
you
the
really
backyard of
allowed
the
it,
HOA
or
building.
have you actually just written it, but technically really excluding it?
But you can limit it down to, I guess the 20 feet and 13 feet is really based upon the Downing line picture, because somebody is trying to accommodate that. But if we say you can have a tube man, but it can only be 10 feet.
You could do that too.
And this way you kind of still allow for it, but it is now manageable. I don't know whether it is practical, but at the very least, you have an option.
I still can't
right?
see a good reason to allow it.
I'm just playing the devil's advocate here, right?
That's what I was trying to play as well. If there has to be an approved option, let's make it unappetizing.
The other question was, if we have to, let's say, we decide commercial, nothing happens in the commercial one, but in the non-commercial space, is there a way that we can segment it further and say, the only events this can be allowed at is maybe an HOA event. I'm just wondering if
No, we have to treat all non-commercial speech the same. So in theory, even if a business is running a blood drive, most likely they would be able to apply for the sign because the sign's associated with the blood drive that they're having.
I just think it's easier to just go, no.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah, based upon all the reasoning you have given.
And like you said, there are better, easier ways to advertise. Just because you bought one doesn't mean you have to use it going forward. I mean, you really don't.
I mean, in theory, one could dress it up for different holidays and use it in their front yard. And that is completely probably exempted in some ways because we do allow inflatables
That's a good idea.
Decorations.
during the holiday. So, I mean, it may not be a complete and total loss. But, I could glue a patriotic cat.
I got some good ideas for Davis Drive.
So now you're discriminating between Santa Claus and a tube man.
There's religious exemptions that kind of apply sometimes too. So that's what I don't know. How is it going to stand in the new code? I can't remember.
Santa Claus wouldn't apply either.
There's certain religious exemptions that kind of fall into play.
Yeah, we were still talking through that with the consultant, but it looks like holiday decorations will continue to be exempt.
But why?
So we need to bring this to some sort of conclusion here.
No, but that's
what we'll come down to, probably.
no, but it's
Take
sorry.
the straw man. Tim, are you in favor of banning
Banning the tube man and all like things.
Okay.
I am also, yes.
Arlene?
Down with tube man.
Agreed.
I'm in fact, I would say tube man, Santa Claus, or anything. I mean, I would encourage you not to even consider, any religious exemptions for this either. I mean, it doesn't violate your religious freedom of expressing or practicing your religion. It doesn't have to be signage related.
I missed the top level. Are you for that or against that?
So I'm saying no tube man, no Santa Claus, no cross, no om, nothing.
So you're saying no inflatable signs. Okay.
Period.
Well, usually the town doesn't have inflatables anyway, so I don't think.
But one of our residents on Davis Drive has lots of inflatables
Oh, I know. I love that house.
for holidays,
But it's,
religious or otherwise.
that's right.
They celebrate seasons.
Well, but that's the point, right? Is if you are going to make exceptions or exemptions, you kind of open doors.
Well, those just aren't signs, right? I mean, they are not considered signs, period, are they?
They're decorations. They're not
They're still
signs.
signs.
Are those exceptions our exceptions, or are they something that's
Those are
placed
currently
on-
exceptions that we have in our code.
But is that specific to us, or is that like a federal thing?
No, I mean, we currently allow it. I would say, we talked about when do your regulations go too far. If you're asking this department to go on Santa Patrol, we may have gone too far. It's just, because the reality is, how many people for different religions have kind of these little pennants that are hung across their front door, hung across their garage.
Yeah.
It's important to the religion. And I think those really fall within some of the same weight as an inflatable Santa Claus.
I think for this evening's discussion, we've already gone too far. So we got enough trouble without going down that road. So I think what I heard was a resounding consensus against men or inflatables or mechanical signs that move. So
It's changing the code, period, right?
That would be option 3, I guess, is what we favor. Is that?
Okay. And I think what we'll probably, I'll make the suggestion then is that, like staff, you're not in favor of it. However, we will prepare two options because they will still continue probably to require it. I'll bring it back if they continue to push. We will just make sure there's an alternative out there when they're reviewing it, and they do not have to vote on a sign code that is consistent with staff's recommendation and planning and zoning board's recommendation, and that's most likely the path they would take.
I think my view of part of what we do is to give council our opinion and our advice, and also a reason for them to take a certain action. What I saw at the discussion was, of course, no council member wanted to be seen to be unpopular and, going against something. It's like being against motherhood and apple pie. They didn't want to go against blood drives, or they didn't want to criticize any particular HOA. So I think part of what we do is we're non-political, and we should give the advice that we've considered it from all angles, and we recommend against those movable signs, period. I don't think we want to give council alternatives.
I would agree. Yes, when you start giving alternatives, this or that, you are now you are not giving them sound advice.
Okay. Again, staff firmly believes that option 3 is the way to go. We've done, our economic growth has been great since 1990, so I don't believe it's inhibited us anyway by not allowing them.
And just to make sure, option 3 applies to both commercial and non-commercial.
It's town-wide. Mm-hmm.
Item 12.
But if it passes, I got some interesting ideas for the upcoming elections.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to activities that are happening in and around Morrisville as it relates to the world of development. In September of this year, we actually didn't have any administrative approvals or any new development applications. As always, it comes in waves. So it's not uncommon that you'll see a wave of submittals and approvals and a wave of, no submittals and no approvals. It's not uncommon at all. However, there were several actions taken by town council. So the first is there were a series of text amendments. They approved 2 ordinance actually related to the burial of overhead lines. They had one that basically said if it doesn't meet currently policy now, they can be waived an exemption. That one was approved effective immediately. They asked that we build a different one that's effective most likely in the spring once we develop a comprehensive policy for undergrounding as well as a master plan. That one's slated to go into effect in the spring. It may change. There may be some additional code changes that have to occur, but they were not okay with the AEC process, and that's why we ended up with really 2 codes as a result. One effective immediately, the other effective sometime in the spring, pending some of the items. The Main Street AEC, that was passed. Clearly you saw an application come forward with that this evening. As part of the AEC amendment, if you remember, there was a provision in there that we could charge fees for third-party reviews. As a result, we had to do a fee schedule amendment. That was adopted as well. And the wall that's associated with the Preston development, that was approved as well. Those are 3 little things. The next is we do have a new employee, Chris Lawson, who's been sitting here all evening. So he joined us on the 24th, and he fills our last vacant position for the Planner 2 that was authorized as part of the FY19 budget. He comes with us experience from Pitt County, correct me if I'm wrong, as well as Virginia Beach. But he went to school at ECU, so apparently there's more purple in my office. Which is really not that big of a deal, but I think it makes other people in my office extremely happy. The more purple, the better. Still waiting for somebody else from VCU. It hasn't happened yet. Maybe one day. But nope, that's a little bit. Oh, and then a couple of little things too. Transportation plan hearings were closed. They've had made progress. Millicent They have decided to turn the Millicent connection into an emergency access, and then develop a greenway all the way along Little to Davis. So basically creating what's now going to be called the Breckenridge Loop in the plan. That was the consensus that we moved forward with. There was also consensus to remove any road connection for Crabtree Crossing Extension. What has not been discussed is whether or not an emergency access road could be built. That is on the agenda for next Tuesday, and I'll bring you an update on that. We honestly have not discussed anything else since it was presented on August the 25th, but we will be plowing through section by section. I have a list of questions that they will be covering, and I did send them a fair amount of homework last week as well, so they would be prepared for the meeting, and then encouraged everybody to just reread the document. So as we went through chapter by chapter, it really wasn't that foreign since they were handed the document back in August. Land use plan update. We did have an event at East Meets West. I'm not sure if any of you were there, but Dylan and Brad had a table there. They had a lot of great information. I can't say we heard anything necessarily new. Actually wasn't a whole lot on schools, and there was only one comment for Crabtree Crossing Extension and one comment against Crabtree Crossing Extension. So most of it was really just good feedback in general. We are going to attend Trunk or Treat. So if you're there, we will be there handing out candy. We are also going to be at the farmer's market one Saturday. It's the same exercise over and over and over again. We're going to hit a bunch of HOAs, so don't be surprised if your HOA has accepted our offer that we will be in a neighborhood near you, also hosting this same event. Just trying to get as much information as possible. Town Council tomorrow night is holding their version of the vision exercise that y'all had. It's actually the same exact version. And that's really the same thing that we're doing throughout the community. What we're doing a little bit differently is we've given different color tags, and they can write their information and then post it, whereas y'all actually had sentences to fill out. So they're tagging maps. And so that is moving along as well.
Will their tags be captured somewhere that we can see?
Correct. Yes. So we are taking a picture of them, and then we are actually entering them, if you remember the map, where you could add comments, we're putting them all comments into one map as well. So we're creating a digital version of all of our hard copy maps at each event and building one master map of comments.
So if I want to see just town councils, then I would look at the map you take a picture of.
Yes.
Okay.
And I would suggest that you actually come by and take a look at it because it's a little more difficult to read. It's what you will see, these little arrows that will, well, actually theirs would be, I take that back. They're not doing the arrows. They are doing the exercise of writing like you. So you can request, remember how y'all filled out comments? So you can request copies of those if you would like to see it. It's audio tomorrow as well, so you can always go back and watch the video. What we are doing slightly different is we ask y'all kind of all three questions. For them, it's really hitting on the last, what's the area of opportunity, and then picking up the other information of that. But yes, everything's public records, so you're welcome to request anything.
Great. So one question I had about the transportation plan, actions on town council's part. So I listened to both of those meetings, live, but at home, covered on my couch till whatever, 11 or 12, whenever it was. I never heard a whole lot of conversation, and I don't think we ever got to it either, around some of the other options around preserving the option of the future without having the whole line on the map for a Crabtree Crossing extension. I was wondering, did we miss something, maybe an opportunity there of just having a segment from the north part of Crabtree Crossing as it sits today, just going through that parcel, and ending there? Did that ever, was that an issue with that, or did we ever even go down that path?
We never went down that path.
Okay.
Really from where I stand, I think you did a very good job listening to the public and really balancing the needs of both sides. You were interested in preserving, understanding it was, on the front end, but when the plan was prepared, we heard one of the resigning themes is more extensions, more opportunities. Even as part of the land use plan, comment was, McCrimmon, that's perfect. We need more of those. And there was even comments, such as Crabtree Crossing would be another example of that. So I think from kind of the front end, when Kimley Horn prepared the plan, they took all public comment they received, and all comments were adding it. There wasn't a comment on the front end when the plan was prepared that said keep as is. So that's how we ended up with kind of the draft plan. Then I think this board as a whole did a really good job of listening and trying to develop a compromise. And when it went to council, council's allowed to modify. There was a lot of discussion on preservation, non-preservation, but the fact is, if it's not on the plan, council can do as they choose. They can allocate money through CIP process for anything that they want to. Even if it's a lower priority, say for parks, all that's desired and wanted is tennis courts, and the very bottom thing is, a Whitewater Rapids Park, they can build a Whitewater Rapids Park if they chose to do so. From the standpoint of where current planning sits and we are obligated to adhere to whatever's in the plan. So when a developer comes in and there is no line on a map, regardless of which line that is, we cannot require a public right-of-way dedication. Right. And it really, if you look, we have right-of-way preserved for McCrimmon that's now being built as part of Phase 1 that occurred through that process. It required sheets to, locate at a particular place. With that particular project, they had alignments that weren't going to work for McCrimmon. And we were able to go back and no, this has to be a functional alignment. That's with the transportation plan. Were they required to build all the road for McCrimmon? Absolutely not. It's proportional to whatever your project is. So that was really one lane in and one lane out the signal. And the signal was designed around that. So when we went through and have the bonding funding or bond funds for that, we're going to improve the signal, we're going to widen the road, but we had secured all the right-of-way. There's right-of-way on the airport when the Montessori school was expanded. There's right-of-way dedicated associated with that as well. So that's where on the development side, and it's important. And so two distinguished, council understood it, we talked about it. I should say I believe they understood it because there was a fair amount of conversation about it. But at the end of the day, if you want preservation to occur or construction to occur, through the development process, you need to make sure your lines are what you want. You need to make sure cross sections are what you want, because that is what we are aiming to make sure that's met in accordance to the regs. Because while we always say the land use plans are policies, the fact is they are law to a certain extent from the development side because they're required to comply with it.
I think when we all came to a consensus that keeping it in there was best. And so we never backed down to, okay, what's that next best option if it gets taken out, right? I don't think we ever considered it because we had consensus to keep it in. And so I feel like, maybe there's some options that still haven't really been explored to their, finality on that could still be actually even a better compromise than we had before,
And the only option that will be discussed at this point was one that was not resolved at the last meeting, and that is for a emergency access road. That's the only option that will be discussed at this point.
How exactly would that work?
And so we actually have some emergency access roads now.
It'd be a one-lane wide greenway.
It would be most likely. It's not designed, but the other ones that we have similar, they're far enough for fire lane. And the weight is going to be supportive of a fire lane. So basically, it's a glorified fire lane. No curb and gutter. There would be no bike lanes. There would be no sidewalk.
They could get across the swampland.
They could cut across. So basically, if they
the road can't. I'm struggling to see how that is even possible because what we were told was that we couldn't go across that without spending $11 billion.
The cost is different because, again, your cross-section is different. Now, your impacts to the stream with regards to going across, your width is different, but your length would be the same. The difference is what type of structure can support, a fire truck that you don't necessarily need. You don't have curb and gutter, like I said. That's less of a cost. The width is not 26 feet, it's probably 20 feet. There's no bike lanes. So the cost is less from material standpoint, but I can't tell you what type of culverts or bridge or any of that's needed to let you know what the cost difference there is. Is there a cost difference or is it relatively the same? I have no idea. I mean, it hasn't been designed.
The takeaway that I have, having been at the council meetings and seen some of the discussion, the thing that I thought I could have done better was at the very beginning emphasized what the transportation plan was. Was it a visionary statement about things that could happen in 25 years' time, or was it a detailed discussion about certain intersections? And I think we straddled. We went from vision, but we also were talking about today's problems at certain intersections, and that was perhaps something that I didn't make clear. And I think that resulted in some unnecessary anxiety in the Preston community, which I regret. That they took something and they amplified it and made it worse and just got out of hand. So there was some ad hominem discussions which were very inappropriate and some things which were just totally wrong that were said. But I think I could have done a better job presenting to the council that this section at least is visionary and that we're trying to preserve the right-of-way for the future just in case, because who knows what's going to happen. So that's my takeaway, and next time we'll do better. So
yeah, I mean,
I'll be about 87 and a half by the time we get to the next one.
I thought we beat the horse pretty well, but sometimes I guess vision isn't as important as voice, right?
They beat the horse better.
Maybe they beat the horse better than we did. I don't know.
What a tragedy that all that time's been taken on this one tiny part.
I know.
I didn't get any impression that the council members had gone through that transportation plan in any depth, but that's easy to say.
I totally concur with your last statement based upon the phone calls I got. But I will say this, right? It kind of comes down to, remember during the transportation plan, I was asking the question is, do we really want to spend so much time on a 25-year outlook plan as opposed to looking at it in the 10 to 15-year plan, right? And based on I went back and read some of the commentary from the councils. I almost heard them say, it's not worth looking 25 years out. Let's just look at the short term.
And that's the part I didn't understand, because everything the next 10 years is already funded or in the commitment path.
Correct.
So you're never looking at it from a traffic plan, thinking about 5 to 10 years. That's already in the works.
Yeah.
But it comes to how you think about state transportation improvement plan. Funding's allocated every 5 years. So if you looked, remember if there was a map that says everything that was allocated was all in those yellow lines of thoroughfares, and that's where that comes to. It's in 5-year increments. What your strategies are is how then, the state's going to build regional improvements. How do you change the timeline of those regional improvements? Is it a LAP funding project? Morrisville Carpenter Road is a LAP funding project. And so an example, I think, when you start looking at forecasting down the road and you start making decisions, we have most of the right-of-way for airport. So do we go ahead and prepare the designs for that? Construction plans don't expire. So if we establish a set of plans now, we know what the cost is. If we know what the cost is, we can then go out and ask for bonding, to cover up the difference if we wanted to apply for LAP funding. So those are some of the strategies that come into play. But again, and I think this is where people started kind of intertangling as a general rule. We have a CIP and we have comp plans. They are two fundamentally different things. You use a comp plan to inform a CIP plan, but a CIP plan certainly doesn't have to match any comp plans. And by comp plans, we're picking up Parks and Rec, we're picking up transportation, we're picking up land use. It's all those initiatives in there. I think in many ways, some of that hopefully is probably behind us, and that we can focus on some of the really great things in there. Council is aware that currently we have no greenway plan. This has taken so long that we officially no longer have a greenway plan on the town. So if we have a project that comes in that has a greenway that's identified on our plan or even the old plan, we're going to ask nicely that they include it, but they're potentially costing taxpayer dollars if it means we have to acquire the easements and we have to pay for all of that somewhere down the road. Or worst case scenario, we're potentially prohibiting ourselves from even being able to do it at all because we now have a building that's in the way of our greenway. So currently where I stand, I am trying to move them along diligently. We've gotten the two tough topics, I think, behind us. One still kind of on the surface. We still have to talk about emergency access. I don't know if that's going to be a 15-minute conversation or if it's going to be an hour-long conversation. And at this point, that project is allocated about 1 hour per meeting. And if it becomes an hour long and an hour long, then it may not be adopted in my lifetime. And as I said earlier today, I still think I have a good 40 years. 40, not 4. 40 years out there. So, our goal is to help get them across the finish line, to answer any questions that they have, to help understand that, is the public transit portion as robust as it could be right now? No, but do we really want to start putting stuff in there to make it robust when it's not going to be factual? Or do we need to get our RFP out there for, the Wake Transit, for our transit study that we're working on and then coming back? So there's going to be revisits to that, but I think at this point, Crabtree Crossing is not a road, and we're going to have to move forward with that. Millicent's not a road; it is a greenway, and I think we presented some really good options for them with regards to Millicent, and they chose the appropriate options.
Yeah, that's as we do land use plan and others, it kind of limits the entire what you can do with the land if given some of the decisions that were made. Right. So
I think you should continue doing what you did because y'all did a great job.
Yeah,
y'all did an excellent job. You listened to the public. You balanced concerns from the public with concerns as the town-wide. And your role is to make sure that the town needs are met, and you tried to do that while addressing concerns from the citizen. You should be highly commended for what you did.
I still think we presented the right plan, and it's.
Yep.
So I'm good. I'm happy with what came out of here, right? So Peter, don't be too hard on yourself about what you feel like we should have done differently on that side.
Always looking for improvement. I think we've kind of mixed 12 and 13. Any more comments from your side, Courtney?
No, none at all.
Thank you very much. Tim, any board comments?
No.
So the only one I'd make is welcome Chris. Sorry we've given you this baptism of fire. Sometimes they're better than this. Sometimes they're worse.
If you had joined last month, you would have been out of here in an hour's time.
Missed it.
Yeah, this is not the latest meeting we've had.
Yeah.
Who would like to make a motion?
I will move that we adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.